They thought she'd stay hidden. They were wrong. When Evelyn Sterling walked into the Silvercrest Charity Gala in a midnight black couture gown, every person who'd whispered about her humiliation fell silent. Her husband's mistress, draped in red and dripping with arrogance, believed she'd already won. But what Scarlett Hayes didn't know was that Evelyn had orchestrated this entire night. Every guest, every witness, every devastating revelation. Because true power doesn't beg or scream. It plans. And tonight, the real queen was taking back her throne. If you want to see how Evelyn dismantles her betrayers with pure elegance, stay until the end. Hit that like button and comment what city you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. The Imperial Crown Club ballroom glittered like a jewel box designed to showcase wealth. Crystal chandeliers cast prismatic light across marble floors, while champagne flowed as freely as the gossip that fueled New York's elite social circles. Tonight's Silvercrest Charity Gala wasn't just another fundraiser. It was the event where reputations were made or destroyed, where alliances shifted with a handshake, and where everyone who mattered came to see and be seen. Victor Sterling stood near the grand staircase, his hand possessively curved around Scarlett Hayes' waist. At 52, Victor still carried the commanding presence that had built his real estate empire. Broad shoulders, silver-threaded dark hair, and the kind of confidence that came from never hearing the word no. His tailored Brioni tuxedo probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, and he wore it with the casual arrogance of someone who'd forgotten what struggle felt like. Scarlett practically vibrated with triumph beside him. At 26, she was everything Victor's social circle expected from a powerful man's mistress. Young, beautiful, and hungry for validation. Her crimson Valentino gown had been chosen specifically to announce her presence, to declare that she wasn't hiding in shadows anymore. The dress plunged dramatically, hugged every curve, and cost a fortune that Victor had paid without blinking. "Everyone's looking at us," Scarlett whispered, her French manicured fingers playing with the diamond tennis bracelet Victor had given her last week. "They know, don't they? They know I'm replacing her." Victor's smile was indulgent, the way one might humor a child. "They're looking because you're stunning, darling. And yes, I imagine the gossip mill has been working overtime." He didn't mention that his wife Evelyn had been the subject of even more gossip lately. Poor, humiliated Evelyn Sterling, abandoned by her husband for a younger woman, supposedly hiding away in their Hamptons estate, too mortified to show her face in public. The narrative had spread through their social circles like wildfire, fueled by carefully placed comments from Victor himself. "Is it true she's not coming tonight?" Scarlett asked, unable to hide the eagerness in her voice. "I heard she basically had a breakdown." "Evelyn's always been delicate," Victor said smoothly, the lie rolling off his tongue with practiced ease. "She doesn't handle stress well. I'm sure she's at home with a book and a glass of wine, pretending none of this is happening." Scarlett's laugh was bright and thoughtless. "God, how did you stand being married to someone so boring for 15 years? Victor didn't answer. The truth was complicated, and complications didn't fit the simple narrative he'd constructed. It was easier to let Scarlett and everyone else believe that Evelyn had been nothing more than a placeholder wife, someone he'd outgrown like an old suit. What he'd conveniently forgotten, or perhaps never truly understood, was that Evelyn Sterling had been the architect of half his success. Her family connections had opened doors that his ambition alone never could have. Her strategic mind had guided decisions that made his company thrive. Her grace had smoothed over the rough edges of his aggressive business tactics, turning potential enemies into allies. But those contributions were invisible to people like Scarlett, who only saw the surface, the quiet wife at charity events, the woman who didn't demand the spotlight, the partner who made success look effortless by working tirelessly behind the scenes. "Victor, there you are. Thomas Blackwood approached with his wife Margaret, both fixtures of New York's old money establishment. Thomas ran one of the most prestigious private equity firms in the city, while Margaret sat on the boards of half a dozen cultural institutions. They were exactly the kind of people Victor wanted to impress, especially now that he was planning his next major development project. "Thomas, Margaret, wonderful to see you both." Victor's charm was automatic, perfected over decades of networking. "May I introduce Scarlett Hayes? She's an interior designer, incredibly talented." Scarlett extended her hand with a confidence that bordered on presumption. "It's such an honor to meet you both. I've heard so much about your art collection, Margaret. I'd love to discuss some ideas for displaying pieces in Victor's new downtown development. Margaret's smile was polite but cool, her eyes taking in every detail of Scarlett's youth, her dress, her obvious inexperience with this particular social stratum. How enterprising of you, dear. Though I should mention that Evelyn has been consulting on my collection for years. She has such an exquisite eye. The slight was subtle but unmistakable. Scarlett's cheeks flushed. Yes, well, Evelyn and I are transitioning our arrangement, Victor said quickly, his hand tightening slightly on Scarlett's waist, a warning to stay quiet. You understand how these things go. Thomas's expression remained carefully neutral. Actually, Victor, I was hoping to have a word with you later about the Riverside project. Some of the investors have questions. There was something in Thomas's tone that made Victor's instincts prickle. Of course, though I wasn't aware there were any concerns, everything's proceeding exactly as planned. Perhaps we should discuss it in private, Thomas suggested, his gaze sliding briefly to Scarlett before returning to Victor. Later in the evening? Before Victor could respond, a ripple of something, surprise, curiosity, shock, moved through the ballroom like a wave. Conversations paused mid-sentence. Heads turned toward the entrance. Even the orchestra seemed to soften, as if the music itself recognized that something significant was happening. Victor turned, following the collective gaze of 300 people, and felt his world tilt. Evelyn Sterling stood at the top of the grand staircase, pausing for just a moment, long enough for every eye to register her presence, but not so long that it seemed rehearsed. The pause was perfect, calculated, devastating in its simplicity. She wore midnight black, a custom gown that transformed elegance into armor. The dress was sophisticated without being showy, expertly tailored to her frame, with a neckline that suggested rather than displayed, and a silhouette that spoke of confidence rather than desperation. No plunging necklines, no desperate grabs for attention, just pure, undeniable presence. Her dark hair was swept up in a classic chignon, showcasing the graceful line of her neck and the simple diamond studs at her ears. Her grandmother's, Victor remembered with a jolt, worth more than Scarlett's entire jewelry collection combined. Her makeup was subtle, enhancing rather than masking. At 36, Evelyn carried her beauty with the quiet assurance of someone who had nothing left to prove. But it was her expression that truly commanded the room. Not angry, not wounded, not hiding, composed, serene, absolutely in control. Oh my God, Scarlett breathed beside him. She actually came. Victor couldn't speak. His mind was racing through calculations, trying to understand what this meant, what Evelyn was planning. This wasn't the devastated wife he'd expected. This wasn't the woman who should be hiding in shame. This was something else entirely. Evelyn descended the staircase with the unhurried grace of someone who knew every eye was on her and was completely unconcerned by the attention. She didn't scan the crowd searching for allies or enemies. She simply moved through space as if she owned it, because, in many ways, she did. Senator Patricia Whitmore was the first to approach, breaking from her conversation circle with visible determination. Evelyn, my dear, you look absolutely magnificent. I wasn't sure you'd make it tonight. Patricia. Evelyn's embrace was warm, genuine. I wouldn't have missed it. The Silvercrest Foundation does such important work. How is Marcus? I heard his confirmation hearings went wonderfully. Just like that, Evelyn was holding court. Within minutes, she was surrounded by people Victor recognized as the true power players of the city. Judges, senators, CEOs, cultural icons. People who might entertain Scarlett's presence out of politeness, but who genuinely respected Evelyn. And they were all looking at her with something that made Victor's stomach tighten, admiration mixed with curiosity. They wanted to know what she would do next. They were interested in her story, her perspective, her next move. She had transformed from victim to protagonist in the span of a single entrance. She's doing this on purpose, Scarlett hissed, her earlier confidence evaporating. She's trying to embarrass us. Don't be ridiculous, Victor said, but his voice lacked conviction. She's just putting on a brave face. That's not a brave face, Victor. That's someone who thinks they've already won. Across the room, Evelyn laughed at something Judge Harrison said, her voice carrying that distinctive warmth that had always made people lean closer, want to be included in whatever moment she was creating. She wasn't performing grief or humiliation. She was simply being herself, which somehow made her more formidable than any dramatic display could have achieved. "Victor, darling." His mother, Catherine Sterling, materialized beside them like an elegant bird of prey in champagne silk. At 74, Catherine maintained the iron discipline and social acuity that had made her a force in New York society for 5 decades. She air-kissed Scarlett with the bare minimum of acknowledgement before turning her full attention to her son. "I see your wife has decided to grace us with her presence," Catherine said, her voice pitched low but sharp enough to cut glass. "How unexpected." "Mother, I don't." Catherine's smile never wavered, but her eyes were flint. "Whatever you were planning to say, save it. Half the room is watching to see how you'll react, and the other half is watching to see what Evelyn will do. Try not to make this worse than you already have." "I haven't done anything wrong," Victor said, but even to his own ears it sounded defensive. "My marriage to Evelyn has been over for years. Everyone knew we were just going through the motions." Catherine's laugh was brittle. "Is that what you tell yourself? Darling, you didn't just end a marriage, you publicly humiliated one of the most connected women in this city. Did you really think there would be no consequences? Or did you assume Evelyn would just quietly disappear?" "She's been hiding for weeks," Scarlett interjected, apparently unable to read the room well enough to stay silent. "We haven't done anything she wasn't already—" "Miss Hayes," Catherine turned to her with a look that could freeze champagne. "I'm going to give you some advice that your youth clearly hasn't taught you yet. In situations like these, silence is not just golden, it's survival. I suggest you learn the difference between winning and appearing to win. Because right now, the only person in this room who looks like they're winning is standing over there in black, surrounded by people who actually matter." Scarlett's mouth opened, then closed. She looked to Victor for support, but he was watching Evelyn, trying to decode her strategy, trying to understand what game she was playing, because it was definitely a game. Evelyn didn't do anything without purpose. 15 years of marriage had taught him that much, even if he'd apparently forgotten every other lesson. "Mrs. Sterling!" Caroline Morrison, the city's most influential gossip columnist, appeared with a photographer in tow. "You look absolutely radiant. Can we get a photo?" "Of course, Caroline." Evelyn's smile was gracious as she posed, alone, needing no one to complete her picture. "Though I hope you'll focus most of your coverage on the Foundation's work tonight. They're announcing a new initiative for arts education that I'm particularly excited about." Naturally, Caroline agreed, though her eyes were already calculating angles, headlines, narratives. "But I have to ask, there's been so much speculation about your situation. Are you planning to make any kind of statement tonight?" Evelyn's laugh was soft, genuinely amused. "Caroline, you know I've never been one for public drama. I'm here to support a cause I care about, to see friends I've missed, and to enjoy a beautiful evening. Anything beyond that is just noise, don't you think?" It was a masterclass in deflection, acknowledging the elephant in the room while refusing to feed it, maintaining dignity without appearing defensive. Caroline looked almost disappointed not to get a more inflammatory response. "And how are you feeling about everything?" Caroline pressed, unwilling to let it go completely. "It must be difficult." "Difficult?" Evelyn considered the word as if tasting it. "I suppose transitions always are. But I'm discovering that change can be incredibly liberating when you stop fighting it and start embracing it. Now, if you'll excuse me, I see Dr. Matthews, and I've been wanting to discuss his new medical research initiative." She moved away with perfect timing, leaving Caroline with a quote that said everything and nothing, that could be interpreted a dozen different ways depending on what narrative you wanted to believe. "She's good," Margaret Blackwood murmured, having returned to their group while Victor was distracted. "I'd forgotten how good she is at working a room." "She's my wife," Victor said automatically, then caught himself. Is. We're not divorced yet." "No," Thomas agreed. "You're not. Which brings me back to what I wanted to discuss about the Riverside project. You see, Victor, several of our investors have become concerned about the optics of this situation. The Sterling name carries weight in this city, but it's Evelyn's connections that open many of the doors for your current ventures. Now, I'm not saying business should be affected by personal matters, but that's exactly what you're saying." Victor's voice was harder now, defensive. You're suggesting that my private life should dictate my business relationships. I'm suggesting, Thomas said carefully, that you may have underestimated how many of those relationships were actually Evelyn's relationships that she generously shared with you. When a marriage ends, things get complicated. Loyalties shift. And from what I'm seeing tonight, a lot of people are choosing their side. Victor wanted to argue, to dismiss the concern as overblown. But looking around the ballroom with fresh eyes, he began to see it, the way certain people who would normally gravitate toward him were keeping their distance. The subtle shift in dynamics as guests who might have ignored Evelyn in her humiliation were instead treating her like royalty returned from exile. She had been working behind the scenes, he realized with growing unease. All those weeks he'd assumed she was hiding, nursing her wounds, falling apart. She'd been planning, strategizing, preparing for exactly this moment. I should go talk to her, Victor said abruptly. Clear the air. This is ridiculous. We're adults. We can handle this with maturity. Victor, I really don't think, Margaret began, but he was already moving, leaving Scarlett standing awkwardly with his mother and the Blackwoods, her red dress suddenly seeming garish rather than glamorous. Evelyn was talking with Judge Harrison and his wife when Victor approached. She glanced up, registered his presence, and returned her attention to the conversation without so much as a flicker of concern. Absolutely crucial for the appellate courts to maintain independence, Judge Harrison was saying, the pressure from media coverage can be tremendous. Which is exactly why supporting judicial education programs is so important, Evelyn replied. An informed judiciary is a stronger judiciary. I was hoping the foundation might partner with, oh, hello, Victor. She acknowledged him the way one might acknowledge a waiter interrupting dinner, polite, slightly annoyed at the timing, fundamentally unbothered. Evelyn. He tried for warmth and landed somewhere around awkward. You look... I didn't expect to see you here tonight. Didn't you? Her smile was pleasant, empty of emotion. How odd. I've attended this gala for 12 consecutive years. Why would this year be any different? Judge Harrison cleared his throat. Perhaps we should give you two a moment. That's not necessary, Robert, Evelyn said smoothly. Victor and I have nothing to discuss that requires privacy. Unless there's something specific you needed, Victor, because I was in the middle of a conversation. The dismissal was elegant but absolute. In front of one of the most powerful judges in the state, Evelyn had just made it clear that Victor's presence was an interruption, not a priority. I just thought we should talk, Victor said, feeling off balance. Given the circumstances, it seems odd to be at the same event and not acknowledge each other? Evelyn's eyebrow raised fractionally. I just did. Was there something else? This wasn't going at all the way he'd imagined. Where was the hurt, the anger, the desperate need to understand why he'd left? Where was the woman who should be grateful for even a moment of his attention? I suppose I wanted to make sure you were... Okay, he tried, switching tactics. I know this can't be easy for you. Something flickered in Evelyn's eyes. Amusement, maybe, or recognition of the manipulation attempt. How thoughtful of you to be concerned about my well-being, Victor. I assure you I'm managing beautifully. Better than I have in years, actually. But I appreciate your concern. The word dripped with irony so subtle that only Victor caught it. Well, he said, suddenly wanting to escape this conversation that he'd initiated, I'm glad to hear it. If you need anything... I won't, Evelyn said simply. But thank you for the offer. Now, if you'll excuse me, Robert and I were discussing the Foundation's legal structure. Fascinating stuff, really. Community trusts and nonprofit governance. I'm sure you'd find it terribly boring. She'd dismissed him. In front of Judge Harrison, in front of anyone watching their interaction, Evelyn had treated him like an irrelevant interruption and returned to more important matters. Victor found himself walking away, unsure how he'd lost control of that conversation so completely. Behind him, he heard Judge Harrison's low laugh. My goodness, Evelyn, that was expertly handled. Was it? Evelyn's voice carried just far enough for Victor to hear. I was simply being honest. Victor and I truly have nothing to discuss. That ship has sailed, sunk, and been forgotten at the bottom of the ocean. Now, about those nonprofit structures, Scarlett appeared at his elbow, champagne in hand and anxiety written across her face. What did she say? Did you tell her about us? About our plans? There are no plans to tell her about, Victor snapped, then immediately regretted his tone when Scarlett flinched. I'm sorry. She's being difficult. She's supposed to be devastated, Scarlett said, echoing his own thoughts. She's supposed to be hiding, not whatever this is. This is Evelyn being Evelyn, Catherine Sterling said, having materialized behind them once again like an elegantly dressed ghost. I tried to warn you, Victor. Your wife doesn't crumble. She calculates, and I suspect she's been calculating for longer than you realize. What's that supposed to mean? His mother's smile was thin. It means, darling boy, that you may have made the mistake of confusing quiet with weak. Evelyn has spent 15 years building relationships, earning respect, creating a network that has nothing to do with you. While you were busy thinking she was just an accessory to your success, she was creating her own foundation of power. And now she's standing on it, completely independent of you. That's insane, Victor said, but uncertainty crept into his voice. She's a housewife. She managed our social calendar and showed up to events. That's not power. Catherine laughed, the sound sharp with disappointment. A housewife? Is that truly how you see her? Victor, Evelyn Sterling sits on 4 major nonprofit boards, consults for 3 museums, advises 2 senators on cultural policy, and has personal relationships with half the power brokers in this city. She's published in art journals, spoken at international conferences, and built a reputation entirely separate from being Mrs. Victor Sterling. You benefited from all of that, but you never once considered that it was her achievement, not yours. The truth of it hit like cold water. How many business deals had been facilitated by Evelyn's connections? How many difficult conversations had been smoothed over by her diplomatic skills? How many doors had opened because Evelyn Sterling vouched for him, brought him into her circles, made him acceptable to old money and new power alike? He'd told himself, and Scarlett, that Evelyn was just the boring wife he'd outgrown. But what if he'd actually traded away the most valuable asset he'd ever had? Ladies and gentlemen, the evening's host called from the stage. If you could please take your seats, we're about to begin the program portion of our evening. The ballroom shifted as 300 guests moved toward their assigned tables. Victor had purchased a premium table near the front, of course. Visibility was everything at these events. He guided Scarlett toward their seats, noting with irritation that his mother had somehow arranged to sit elsewhere. Then he saw where Evelyn was seated. The Foundation's table of honor, front and center, surrounded by the event's most distinguished guests, the senator, the judge, the museum director, the founder of the city's most prestigious arts program. She belonged there, Victor realized with uncomfortable clarity, not because she was his wife, but because she'd earned that seat through years of genuine contribution. When had that happened? When had Evelyn built this entire life that had nothing to do with him? Victor, this table placement is kind of awkward, Scarlett whispered as they sat down. We're right next to the Harrisons, and Mrs. Harrison keeps looking at me like I'm trash. Just ignore it, Victor said tiredly. Catherine Harrison is old money and old-fashioned. She doesn't approve of change. What he didn't say was that Catherine Harrison had been Evelyn's mentor when she first arrived in New York, fresh out of Columbia with an art history degree and no social connections. Catherine had taken Evelyn under her wing, introduced her to the right people, taught her how to navigate the complex hierarchies of New York society. Of course, Catherine would be Team Evelyn. They all would be. The program began with welcome remarks from the Foundation's president, followed by a video showcasing the year's accomplishments. Victor tried to pay attention, but his eyes kept drifting to Evelyn's table, watching how she engaged with those around her, leaning in to hear better, laughing at jokes, contributing to conversations with obvious intelligence and wit. She was the most compelling person in the room, and she wasn't even trying. And now, the president continued, I'm thrilled to introduce someone who has been instrumental in our foundation's growth over the past decade. She joined our board when we were just a small grant-making organization, and her vision helped transform us into the comprehensive arts education program we are today. Please welcome Evelyn Sterling. The applause was immediate and genuine. Scarlett's face went pale. Evelyn rose with easy grace and walked to the podium, her bearing confident but not showy. When she reached the microphone, she paused, letting the applause fade naturally before speaking. Thank you all for being here tonight, she began, her voice clear and warm. 10 years ago, I sat in a meeting with the Foundation's original board and listened to them discuss a problem. Talented young people across this city who would never have access to arts education simply because of their zip code. And I thought, what if we could change that? What if we could create pathways for young artists regardless of their economic circumstances? She wasn't reading from notes. She was speaking from genuine passion, and the room felt it. Tonight, I'm proud to announce that the Silvercrest Foundation will be launching our most ambitious program yet, the Creative Futures Initiative. Starting next fall, we'll provide full scholarships to 200 students annually, including not just tuition, but materials, mentorship, and connections to professional opportunities. We're not just teaching art, we're building futures. The applause this time was thunderous. Even Scarlett, Victor noticed, was clapping reflexively, caught up in the moment despite herself. Evelyn continued, outlining the program details, sharing student success stories, thanking donors and partners. She was polished, professional, and completely in her element. This wasn't someone playing a role at her husband's side. This was someone who had built something meaningful entirely on her own merit. And I want to particularly thank my fellow board members for their support during what has been a personally transformative year, Evelyn was saying. Change, as we all know, can be challenging, but it can also be the catalyst for growth, for discovering strengths you didn't know you had, for finding your authentic path forward. Victor felt the words land like carefully placed arrows. She wasn't looking at him. She didn't need to. Everyone in the room understood exactly what kind of transformation she was referencing. So, here's to change, Evelyn concluded, raising an imaginary glass, to new beginnings, to finding the courage to choose the life you actually want rather than the life you thought you were supposed to have, to all of us becoming the most authentic versions of ourselves. Thank you. As she returned to her seat amid sustained applause, Victor felt Scarlett shift uncomfortably beside him. She's talking about you, Scarlett whispered, about leaving you being the best thing that ever happened to her. Don't be ridiculous, Victor said, but his voice lacked conviction. Because Scarlett was right. Evelyn hadn't just survived their separation. She'd thrived on it. And she'd just announced that transformation to 300 of New York's most influential people. The program continued, but Victor barely heard it. His mind was spinning through implications, calculating damage, trying to understand how spectacularly he'd misread this situation. During the dinner service, he noticed Margaret Blackwood lean over to whisper something to Evelyn, who laughed in response. A genuine, delighted sound that carried across the tables. When was the last time Evelyn had laughed like that with him? Had she ever? Victor, you're not eating, Scarlett said, nudging his untouched plate. Are you okay? Fine, he said automatically. Just thinking about business. But he wasn't thinking about business. He was thinking about how Evelyn had just executed a perfect countermove. By showing up tonight, poised, successful, surrounded by genuine supporters, she'd reclaimed the narrative. She wasn't the abandoned wife. She was the woman who'd been freed to pursue her real passion. And in making herself the protagonist of her own story, she'd inadvertently made him look like the fool who'd traded gold for glitter. Excuse me, Scarlett said suddenly, standing up. I need to use the ladies' room. Victor barely acknowledged her departure. He was watching Evelyn speak with animated enthusiasm to the young artist sitting beside her, offering mentorship advice with the same focused attention she used to give to his business problems. How many times had he dismissed her input, he wondered? How many strategy sessions had he conducted without her, assuming her contributions were peripheral rather than essential? Victor Sterling. He looked up to find Senator Patricia Whitmore standing beside his table, her expression pleasant but evaluating. Senator Whitmore, wonderful speech earlier about education reform. Thank you. She didn't sit down, maintaining the power position of standing while he remained seated. I wanted to mention that I'm hosting a small dinner next week to discuss arts funding legislation. I hope Evelyn can attend. Her insights would be invaluable. Notice what she didn't say. I hope you both can attend. Just Evelyn. I'm sure she'll make time, Victor said carefully, though I'd be happy to contribute to that conversation as well. Sterling Development has always supported arts initiatives. Through charitable contributions, certainly, Patricia agreed, but Evelyn's understanding of the practical implementation of arts programs goes far deeper than checkbook philanthropy. No offense intended, of course. The offense was absolutely intended, and they both knew it. None taken, Victor lied smoothly. Though I think you might be underestimating my involvement in Victor. Patricia's smile sharpened. I've been in politics for 30 years. I know exactly who does the real work in most power couples, and who gets the credit. Evelyn has been generous about sharing credit with you. But now that you've chosen to end that partnership, don't be surprised when people start recognizing her contributions for what they actually were. Hers. She walked away before Victor could formulate a response, leaving him sitting alone at a table where Scarlett's empty seat and his mother's conspicuous absence made him look exactly like what he was, isolated. Across the room, Evelyn was surrounded by people who genuinely valued her company, her insight, her presence. She hadn't once glanced in his direction since her speech. He was already irrelevant to her narrative. The realization settled in his chest like ice. When Scarlett returned from the restroom 20 minutes later, her earlier confidence had completely evaporated. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her makeup slightly smudged. "What happened?" Victor asked, more out of obligation than genuine concern. "Nothing," Scarlett said quickly. "Just some women were talking in the bathroom." "They didn't know I was in the stall?" And they were saying things about me, about us, about how I'm just another in a long line of... She stopped, pressing her lips together. It doesn't matter. But it did matter, because it was true. Scarlett wasn't the first young woman Victor had pursued. She wasn't even the second or third. There had been others over the years. Brief affairs, longer entanglements, patterns of behavior that Evelyn had tolerated with increasing detachment. What Scarlett didn't know, what Victor had carefully avoided telling her, was that Evelyn had known about all of them, had documented all of them, had simply chosen not to make an issue of it because... why? The answer crystallized with uncomfortable clarity, because Evelyn had stopped caring. Long before Victor left, Evelyn had emotionally divested from their marriage. She'd stayed for reasons that had nothing to do with love, convenience, perhaps, or not wanting the disruption of divorce while building her career. But she'd been planning her exit for years. He could see it now. Every board position she'd accepted, every professional relationship she'd cultivated, every financial account she'd kept separate, she'd been building her escape route. And he'd been too arrogant to notice. "I want to leave," Scarlett said quietly. "Please, Victor, can we just go?" He wanted to argue, to insist they stay and prove they weren't affected by Evelyn's performance. But looking at Scarlett's miserable expression, at the curious and judgmental gazes from surrounding tables, at Evelyn's table where genuine laughter and engagement continued without acknowledging their existence, "Yes," he said heavily, "let's go." They made their excuses and headed for the exit, trying to maintain dignity while essentially fleeing. As they passed Evelyn's table, Victor couldn't help one final glance. She was listening intently to something Judge Harrison was saying, her hand resting lightly on the stem of her wine glass, her posture relaxed and engaged. She didn't look up as they passed, didn't acknowledge their departure, didn't care. The cold November air hit them as they exited onto Fifth Avenue. The valet scrambled to retrieve Victor's Mercedes while Scarlett wrapped her arms around herself, shivering in her thin designer gown. "That was horrible," she said softly. "Everyone was looking at us like we were the villains." "Don't be dramatic," Victor said, but without heat. "People will gossip for a week and then move on to the next scandal." "Will they?" Scarlett looked up at him, mascara-smudged eyes searching his face. "Because it feels like Evelyn just turned this into something bigger than gossip. She made a statement tonight, Victor, and the statement was that she's better off without you." The valet pulled up with the car. Victor tipped automatically, helped Scarlett into the passenger seat, and walked around to the driver's side with mechanical precision. As he pulled away from the curb, he caught one last glimpse through the grand windows of the ballroom. Evelyn was standing now, mid-conversation with a group that had gathered around her. She was animated, vibrant, fully present in a way he couldn't remember seeing in years. She was free, and he was the one who'd freed her. The thought should have brought satisfaction. After all, wasn't that the whole point? He'd wanted out of the marriage, wanted the excitement of someone new, wanted to escape the comfortable but passionless routine his life with Evelyn had become. But looking at Scarlett now, young, beautiful, and completely out of her depth in his world, Victor felt the first real stirrings of doubt. What exactly had he won? They drove through Manhattan in silence, the city lights reflecting off the Mercedes's polished hood. Scarlett stared out her window, lost in her own thoughts. Victor navigated automatically, his mind replaying every interaction from the evening, every subtle slight, every calculated move Evelyn had made. She'd orchestrated the entire night. He could see it now. From her dramatic entrance to her inspiring speech to her casual dismissal of his presence, it had all been choreographed to send a specific message to their entire social circle. Evelyn Sterling was moving on, with grace, with dignity, with a life so full and meaningful that his absence barely registered as a loss. It was brilliant. It was devastating. It was exactly the kind of strategic thinking that had made her an invaluable partner in business and life. The same strategic thinking he'd somehow convinced himself was unimportant. "Victor?" Scarlett's voice was small in the car's leather-scented interior. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "When you told me about Evelyn, about your marriage, you said it had been dead for years, that you were just going through the motions, that she was boring, safe, that she didn't understand you anymore." "Yes," Victor said cautiously, sensing a trap. "The woman I saw tonight wasn't boring or safe. She was—" Scarlett paused, choosing her words carefully. "She was powerful and confident and kind of amazing, actually. So either you lied to me about who she is, or you never really knew her at all." The accusation hung in the air between them. Victor's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "People show different faces in different contexts," he said finally. "Tonight was a performance. Evelyn knows how to play the social game when she needs to." "Is that what you think that was?" Scarlett's laugh was bitter. "A performance? Victor, those people genuinely liked her. That wasn't acting. That was who she actually is when she's happy." When she's happy. The words lodged in Victor's chest like a splinter. When had he last seen Evelyn truly happy? When had her smiles been genuine rather than polite? When had she laughed with him the way she'd laughed tonight with her colleagues and friends? He couldn't remember, and the inability to remember felt like its own indictment. "I don't want to talk about Evelyn anymore," he said shortly. "Tonight was complicated, but it changes nothing about us, about our future together." Scarlett was quiet for a long moment. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a note Victor had never heard before: doubt. "What future exactly?" "Because the one you described, where we'd be accepted by your social circle, where I'd host parties and sit on boards and be part of that world, that future seems pretty impossible after tonight." "Those people will never accept me, Victor. Not as long as Evelyn is the alternative." "Then we'll build our own circle," Victor said with forced confidence. "We don't need them." But even as he said it, he knew it was a lie. His business depended on those connections. His next major development project required buy-in from exactly the kind of people who had surrounded Evelyn tonight. His entire professional identity was built on being part of that world, that network, that exclusive club. And Evelyn held the keys to all of it. They arrived at Scarlett's apartment building, a luxury high-rise in the financial district that Victor had helped her secure, though the lease was in her name. She made no move to invite him up. "I need to think," she said quietly, "about us, about whether this is really what I want." "Scarlett?" "No, Victor. Let me finish." She turned to face him fully. "I'm 26 years old. When we started this, you made it sound like I was rescuing you from a loveless marriage, like I was the exciting new chapter in your life. But tonight I realized something. I'm not a new chapter. I'm just a repeated pattern. And Evelyn? She's not the boring wife you outgrew. She's the woman who got tired of being underestimated and decided to stop waiting for you to appreciate what you had." She opened the car door before he could respond. "Don't call me for a few days," she said. "I need space to figure out if I'm making a terrible mistake." Victor watched her disappear into the building's lobby, feeling like the ground was shifting beneath him in ways he couldn't control. He drove to his own apartment, the penthouse he'd moved into after leaving the house he'd shared with Evelyn. It was modern, sleek, decorated by an expensive designer to look like something from an architecture magazine. It was also soulless, impersonal, and suddenly felt very empty. He poured himself 3 fingers of scotch and stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out over the Manhattan skyline. Somewhere out there, Evelyn was probably still at the gala, still charming donors and building alliances, still being exactly who she'd always been, someone who didn't need him to be complete. His phone buzzed. A text from his mother. "That was quite a performance tonight, both of yours. The difference is Evelyn's was intentional. Call me tomorrow. We need to discuss damage control." Damage control. As if tonight was a crisis to be managed rather than a reality to be accepted. Victor drained his scotch and poured another. For 15 years, he'd believed he was the star of his own story, the successful developer, the powerful businessman, the man who'd built an empire through skill and determination. Evelyn had been the supporting character, the wife who looked good at events and managed the household. But tonight had revealed a different truth. Evelyn had been the co-author of his success all along, and now she was writing her own story, one that didn't include him. He'd thought leaving her would make him feel powerful, free, young again. Instead, for the first time in decades, Victor Sterling felt like he'd made a catastrophic mistake. And the worst part? Evelyn clearly didn't care enough to even be angry about it. She'd simply moved on. The scotch burned going down, but it did nothing to warm the cold realization settling in his bones. He hadn't escaped a cage. He'd walked away from a kingdom. And Evelyn was showing everyone, including him, that she'd never needed a king to rule it. The morning after the gala, Evelyn woke in her suite at the plaza with sunlight streaming through silk curtains and her phone buzzing with messages. She'd chosen to stay in the city rather than return to the Hamptons house, a strategic decision that kept her visible, accessible, and firmly planted in the center of the social sphere she'd just reminded everyone she commanded. She stretched luxuriously in the king-sized bed, taking a moment to savor the quiet satisfaction of a plan perfectly executed. Last night had been about more than just showing up. It had been about reclaiming her narrative, resetting the power dynamics, and reminding 300 influential people exactly who Evelyn Sterling was when she wasn't standing in Victor's shadow. Her phone screen showed 43 text messages, 17 missed calls, and an inbox flooded with emails. "Were magnificent last night. Coffee. This were magnificent last night. Coffee this week. I have questions." From Senator Whitmore. "Brilliant speech. Let's discuss the arts funding dinner. Thursday at 7? From Margaret Blackwood. "You've reminded me why I've always admired you. Lunch soon?" And then, unexpectedly, from Catherine Harrison, the society matriarch who'd been her mentor years ago. "My dear girl, you've finally stopped dimming your light for someone who couldn't appreciate it. Come to tea tomorrow. We have much to discuss." Evelyn smiled at that last one. Catherine had watched her marriage to Victor with increasing disappointment over the years, never saying anything directly, but making her feelings known through carefully chosen silences and pointed observations. Tea with Catherine meant strategy, connections, and probably a lecture about not wasting any more of her prime years on unworthy men. There was nothing from Victor. That was telling in itself. She was halfway through her second cup of coffee when her phone rang. Her lawyer, Rebecca Chen. "Please tell me you saw the society pages this morning," Rebecca said without preamble. "I've been avoiding them, actually. Should I be worried?" "Worried? No." "Delighted?" "Absolutely." Caroline Morrison's column is a love letter to your comeback. The headline is "Sterling Example: How Evelyn Sterling Reminded New York What True Class Looks Like." She barely mentions Victor except to note his surprisingly early departure with his companion. Evelyn laughed. His companion, not even dignified with a name. Scarlett Hayes is mentioned exactly once, identified only as a young woman in attendance. Meanwhile, you get 3 full paragraphs about your foundation work, your speech, and I'm reading directly here, the kind of graceful confidence that can't be bought, only earned through years of genuine contribution to the fabric of our city's cultural life. Caroline does love her prose, Evelyn said, but she was pleased. Public perception mattered in their world, and Caroline Morrison's column reached everyone who counted. "There's more," Rebecca continued. "I've had 2 calls this morning already. One from Victor's attorney, asking if we're prepared to discuss settlement terms. The other from Thomas Blackwood's office, asking if you'd be interested in consulting on a major cultural development project they're planning." Evelyn set down her coffee cup. "Victor's attorney called you? We haven't even filed yet." "Oh, but we have. I filed the papers yesterday afternoon, right before the gala. They were served to Victor's office this morning at 9 a.m. sharp. Rebecca, you're brilliant. I'm thorough, Rebecca corrected. And I'm also strategic. Victor spent weeks assuming you were too devastated to function, which gave us time to prepare everything perfectly. Now he's scrambling to catch up while you're already 3 moves ahead. Speaking of which, we should discuss your asset position. I need to know exactly what you want from this divorce. Nothing that's his, Evelyn said immediately. I have my own money, my own career, my own life. I don't want his properties, his business, or his future earnings. What I do want is a clean break. No alimony, no ongoing financial ties, nothing that keeps us connected. Evelyn, you're entitled to a significant settlement. 15 years of marriage, and you contributed substantially to his success, which is exactly why I don't need his money to prove my worth, Evelyn interrupted. Rebecca, this isn't about punishing Victor or extracting maximum financial value. It's about freedom. I want nothing from him except my independence, my maiden name back, and the satisfaction of knowing I chose to walk away with my dignity intact. There was a pause on the other end of the line. You're serious about the maiden name? You want to go back to Evelyn Ashford? Actually, I'm thinking of taking my mother's maiden name, Laurent. It has a better ring to it for my international work. Evelyn Laurent, Rebecca tested the sound. I like it. Very sophisticated. Very you, actually. All right, I'll draw up papers reflecting your wishes. But Evelyn, I want you to think carefully about this. You're giving up potential millions to gain something more valuable than money, Evelyn finished. Trust me, Rebecca. I know exactly what I'm doing. After hanging up, Evelyn spent the next hour responding to messages, accepting lunch invitations, and carefully cultivating the new narrative she was building. She wasn't the abandoned wife. She was the woman who'd recognized a dead end and chosen a different path. Her phone rang again, this time an unknown number. Evelyn Sterling speaking? Mrs. Sterling, this is James Morrison from the Metropolitan Museum's Board of Trustees. I hope I'm not calling too early? Evelyn's pulse quickened. The Met's board was one of the most prestigious positions in New York's cultural world. Not at all, James. How can I help you? Actually, I'm calling to see if you might help us. We have a vacancy on our acquisitions committee, and after your speech last night about arts access and education, several board members suggested you'd be an ideal candidate. Would you be interested in discussing the position? Evelyn felt a smile spread across her face. The Metropolitan Museum. This was the kind of opportunity she'd dreamed about for years, but had never pursued because it would have required time and attention she'd been spending on supporting Victor's endless business dinners and networking events. I would be very interested, she said carefully, though I should mention that my personal situation is currently in transition. We're aware, James said smoothly. And if I may speak candidly, Mrs. Sterling, that's partly why this feels like perfect timing. The board values independence and expertise. Your work with the Silvercrest Foundation speaks for itself, and your academic credentials in art history are impressive. We're not interested in wives of wealthy men looking for prestigious hobbies. We're interested in Evelyn Ashford Sterling, the professional in her own right. Evelyn Ashford Sterling, soon to be just Evelyn Laurent. But the recognition of her individual merit, separate from Victor's name and money, was exactly what she'd been working toward. Then, yes, absolutely. I'd love to discuss this further. They arranged a meeting for the following week, and when Evelyn hung up, she allowed herself a moment of pure, uncomplicated joy. This was happening. The life she'd imagined during all those lonely nights in a marriage that had died years before its official end, it was actually becoming real. A knock on her suite door interrupted her thoughts. Room service with breakfast, she assumed, though she hadn't ordered anything. Instead, she found her sister standing in the hallway, holding a bakery box and 2 lattes. Olivia, what are you doing here? Olivia Ashford pushed past her into the suite, her practical wool coat and sensible shoes a stark contrast to the plaza's opulent surroundings. At 32, Olivia was everything Evelyn wasn't. A public defender who worked 80-hour weeks, lived in a rent-controlled studio in Brooklyn, and had exactly zero interest in high society. What am I doing here? Evelyn, you just publicly dismantled your marriage in front of New York's entire power structure, and you didn't think to call your sister? Olivia set the bakery box on the suite's elegant coffee table and fixed Evelyn with a look that was part concern, part admiration. I had to read about your dramatic return to society in Caroline Morrison's column over my morning coffee at the bodega. It wasn't dramatic, Evelyn protested, though she was smiling. It was strategic. It was both, and you know it. Olivia opened the bakery box, revealing still warm croissants and chocolate-filled pastries. Sit, eat, tell me everything. And I mean everything, not the sanitized version you'll give to your society friends, but the real story. Evelyn curled up on the suite's velvet sofa, accepting a croissant and feeling the tension she'd been carrying release slightly. Olivia was the only person in her life who'd known Victor for exactly what he was from the beginning: charming, ambitious, and fundamentally self-centered. You were right about him, Evelyn said quietly. You were right about all of it. I take no pleasure in that, Olivia said, though her expression suggested she took at least a little pleasure in it. Okay, maybe a tiny bit of pleasure, but mostly I'm just glad you finally saw it too. So what happened? What was the final straw? Evelyn considered her answer carefully. You know, there wasn't one dramatic moment. It was more like I woke up one morning and realized I'd spent 15 years making myself smaller so he could feel bigger. I'd convinced myself that supporting his success was the same as having my own, that being Mrs. Victor Sterling was enough. But it wasn't. It really wasn't. Evelyn took a bite of croissant, letting the buttery pastry melt on her tongue. And the irony is, Victor thinks he left me. He thinks he made the brave choice to pursue what he really wanted, but the truth is, I'd already left him emotionally years ago. I was just waiting for the right moment to make it official. So you let him think it was his idea? I let him think a lot of things, Evelyn said with a slight smile. It made the logistics easier. While he was busy playing house with Scarlett and congratulating himself on his newfound freedom, I was meeting with lawyers, securing my financial independence, and building relationships that had nothing to do with him. Olivia laughed, shaking her head. You know, when we were kids and you'd beat me at chess every single time, I used to think you were just lucky. But you weren't lucky. You were planning 7 moves ahead while I was still figuring out my next move. Victor never learned to play chess, Evelyn observed. He preferred poker. All bluffing and aggression, no long-term strategy. They ate in comfortable silence for a moment before Olivia spoke again. So what's next? And please don't tell me you're going to do that thing where you pretend to be fine while you're actually falling apart inside. I know you, Evie. I know how you operate. Evelyn met her sister's concerned gaze. I'm not pretending. For the first time in years, maybe decades, I'm actually fine. Better than fine. I feel like I've been holding my breath for 15 years, and last night I finally exhaled. Last night when you showed up at that gala looking like you owned the place? Exactly. Evelyn pulled her knees up to her chest, suddenly looking younger than her 36 years. Liv, you should have seen his face. Victor actually thought I'd be hiding at home, devastated. He brought Scarlett to that gala like she was some kind of prize he'd won. And instead, I walked in and reminded everyone, including him, that I never needed him to be somebody. I already was somebody. Hell yes, you are, Olivia said fiercely. Though I have to ask, how's the kid handling all this? Scarlett, right? The interior designer who's what, 12 years old? 26, Evelyn corrected, though she was smiling. And honestly, I almost felt sorry for her last night. She walked into that ballroom thinking she was Cinderella at the ball, and reality hit her like a brick. Those women, our world, they're not kind to outsiders who don't understand the rules. And you do understand the rules. I wrote half of them, Evelyn said simply. Victor never understood that. He thought the doors opened for him because of his money or his charm. But it was always about relationships, about trust built over years, about proving your value to the community beyond just writing checks. Olivia studied her sister carefully. You're not going to do anything vindictive, are you? Like, I support you 100%, but I also know you're capable of absolutely destroying someone if you want to. I don't want to, Evelyn said honestly. Destroying Victor wouldn't accomplish anything except making me look petty. What I want is much simpler. I want to live my life without him in it. I want to build my career, pursue my passions, and never again diminish myself for someone who can't appreciate what I bring to the table. That's very mature and healthy, Olivia said. I hate how mature and healthy that is. Where's the rage? The desire for revenge? Come on, Evie, give me something. Evelyn laughed, the sound genuine and free. The revenge is my success, Liv. It's me thriving while he scrambles to maintain the empire I helped him build. It's me getting opportunities like the Met Board while he realizes too late that half his business relationships were actually my relationships. The best revenge is showing him and everyone else that I'm better off without him. Okay, that's actually pretty satisfying, Olivia admitted. So tell me about this Met thing. They spent the next hour talking through Evelyn's plans. The board position, her consulting work, the possibility of writing a book about arts patronage and cultural preservation. Olivia listened with the focused attention of someone who genuinely cared, asking questions that helped Evelyn clarify her own thinking. You know what I think? Olivia said finally, gathering up the remains of their breakfast. I think this is who you were always supposed to be. Before Victor, before society expectations, before you convinced yourself that being someone's wife was enough. This is Evelyn Laurent, the woman who's brilliant and accomplished and doesn't need anyone's permission to be amazing. When did my little sister get so wise? Probably around the same time my big sister stopped pretending her marriage was working. Olivia hugged her tightly. I'm proud of you, Evie, for having the courage to start over, for choosing yourself, for being brave enough to want more. After Olivia left, Evelyn spent the rest of the morning working through emails and planning her week. She had lunch with Senator Whitmore on Tuesday, tea with Catherine Harrison on Wednesday, the Met meeting on Thursday, and a foundation board meeting on Friday. Her calendar was full, her purpose clear, her path forward illuminated. She was just about to step into the shower when her phone rang again. Victor's mother, Catherine. Evelyn considered not answering, then changed her mind. Catherine deserved better than avoidance. Catherine, how are you? Disappointed in my son, impressed by you, and calling to see if we might have lunch this week. Catherine's voice was brisk, businesslike. I realize our relationship is complicated by the circumstances, but I hope we can maintain some connection despite Victor's spectacular display of poor judgment. Evelyn felt a warmth spread through her chest. Catherine had always been more than just a mother-in-law. She'd been a mentor, an ally, sometimes even a friend. I'd like that very much, Evelyn said honestly, though I understand if family loyalty complicates things for you. Catherine's laugh was sharp. My dear girl, family loyalty doesn't mean blindly supporting foolish decisions. Victor is my son, and I love him, but that doesn't mean I approve of how he's handled this situation, or how he handled you, for that matter. Catherine, no, let me finish. I watched you transform my son's rough ambition into actual sophistication. I watched you open doors he could never have opened alone. I watched you build a life and career while simultaneously supporting his. And I watched him take all of that for granted until he convinced himself that your contributions were negligible. Catherine paused. I raised him better than that, and I'm profoundly sorry that he failed to be the husband you deserved. Evelyn blinked back unexpected tears. Thank you. That means more than you know. Tuesday at Le Bernardin? 1 o'clock? I'll be there. After hanging up, Evelyn allowed herself a moment to simply feel the complex emotions swirling through her. Relief, sadness, anticipation, liberation. She was mourning the end of her marriage, yes, but not the way Victor probably imagined. She wasn't mourning the loss of him. She was mourning the years she'd wasted, the opportunities she'd delayed, the version of herself she'd suppressed to make room for his ego. But that mourning was already giving way to something else, excitement for what came next. Her phone buzzed with a text. Rebecca Chen. Victor's attorney just called again. He's asking if you'd consider mediation to speed up the process. Also asking if you'd be willing to sign a mutual non-disclosure agreement about the marriage. Thoughts? Evelyn typed back quickly. Yes to mediation, no to NDA. I have no intention of discussing our marriage publicly, but I won't sign away my right to tell my own story if I choose to. Rebecca's response was immediate. Perfect. I'll set up mediation for next week. Also, you should know, Victor's trying to refinance the Riverside project, and he's running into problems. Apparently, several investors are reconsidering their involvement. Evelyn stared at that message, processing its implications. The Riverside development was Victor's most ambitious project yet, a mixed-use complex that would reshape an entire neighborhood. It was also heavily dependent on relationships with investors who had originally come to the table because of Evelyn's connections. She could destroy him so easily. One phone call to Thomas Blackwood, one lunch with the right people, one subtle suggestion that Victor might not be the stable partner they'd believed him to be. The project would collapse, and Victor's reputation would take a hit he might never recover from. But as she sat in her plaza suite, looking out over Central Park with the city spread before her like a promise, Evelyn realized something important. She didn't want to destroy Victor. She wanted to forget him. She typed back to Rebecca, "Not my problem, not my project, not my concern. Let's keep our focus on finalizing the divorce as cleanly as possible." "You're a better person than I am," Rebecca responded. "Most people in your position would be sharpening knives." "Most people aren't me," Evelyn wrote back, and she meant it. The days that followed settled into a rhythm that felt both exhilarating and grounding. Evelyn moved through her newly reclaimed life with purposeful grace, accepting invitations, building connections, and slowly revealing the full scope of her expertise to people who'd only ever seen her as Victor's elegant accessory. Lunch with Senator Whitmore led to a consulting position on cultural policy. Tea with Catherine Harrison resulted in an introduction to a Paris-based gallery owner who was looking for an American partner. The Met Board formally offered her the Acquisitions Committee position, which she accepted with genuine excitement. Through it all, she heard nothing directly from Victor, but the gossip reached her anyway. Whispered conversations at gallery openings, carefully worded questions from mutual acquaintances, Caroline Morrison's column documenting every development with thinly veiled glee. Victor's Riverside project was indeed struggling. 3 major investors had pulled out, citing scheduling conflicts and portfolio rebalancing, but really meaning they'd lost confidence in Victor's ability to deliver without Evelyn's stabilizing influence. Scarlett Hayes had been conspicuously absent from recent social events, leading to speculation about trouble in paradise. And Victor himself had reportedly become short-tempered at work, snapping at employees and making uncharacteristic business mistakes. Evelyn felt no satisfaction in any of it. If anything, she felt a distant sadness for the man Victor could have been if he'd ever learned to value partnership over possession. It was Friday evening, exactly 1 week after the gala, when everything shifted again. Evelyn was at the foundation offices, reviewing grant applications with 2 other board members, when her assistant knocked softly on the conference room door. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but there's someone here to see you. She says it's urgent." "Who is it?" The assistant's expression was carefully neutral. "Scarlett Hayes." The room went silent. Both board members looked at Evelyn with undisguised curiosity, clearly wondering how she'd handle this unexpected development. Evelyn took a slow breath, considering her options. She could refuse to see Scarlett, could have her assistant send the young woman away. It would be justified, even expected. But Evelyn had built her reputation on grace, not pettiness. "Thank you, Jennifer. Please show her to my office. I'll be there in 5 minutes." She turned to her colleagues. "If you'll excuse me, it seems I have an unexpected meeting." "Of course," Martha Chen said, her eyes bright with interest. "Take your time. We can finish reviewing these applications next week." Evelyn gathered her materials with deliberate calm, refusing to rush or appear flustered. Whatever Scarlett wanted, Evelyn would handle it the same way she handled everything else, with dignity and strategic thinking. She found Scarlett waiting in her office, perched nervously on the edge of a chair like a bird ready to take flight. The young woman looked nothing like she had at the gala. No designer gown, no carefully styled hair, just jeans, a simple sweater, and an expression that combined fear and determination in equal measure. "Thank you for seeing me," Scarlett said immediately, standing as Evelyn entered. "I wasn't sure you would." "I almost didn't," Evelyn said honestly, settling into the chair behind her desk. "But curiosity won out. What can I do for you, Miss Hayes?" Scarlett winced at the formal address. "I came to apologize and to warn you, I guess." "Warn me?" Evelyn's eyebrows rose. "About what?" "About Victor. About what he's planning." Scarlett twisted her hands together. "I know you have no reason to believe me or trust me. I know I'm probably the last person you want to talk to, but I couldn't just let him do this without trying to tell you." Evelyn leaned back in her chair, studying the young woman carefully. Scarlett looked genuinely distressed, her earlier confidence completely evaporated. "Why don't you start at the beginning?" "The beginning is that I was an idiot," Scarlett said bluntly. "A complete naive idiot who believed everything Victor told me about you, about his marriage, about what we could have together. I thought I don't know what I thought. That I was special, I guess. That he really loved me. And now you've realized you're not special and he doesn't really love you, Evelyn said, not unkindly. Welcome to a pattern that probably started long before me and will continue long after you. Scarlett flinched but nodded. That's what his mother said. She called me this week, did you know that? Catherine Sterling called me and very politely explained that I'm the fourth woman in 5 years that Victor's had a serious affair with, and that I should cut my losses before I waste any more time. Evelyn felt a surprised smile tug at her lips. Catherine was more proactive than she'd realized. She also told me, Scarlett continued, that you knew about all of them, all of Victor's affairs, that you knew and just didn't care anymore, that you'd been planning to leave for years but were waiting for the right time. Is that true? Yes, Evelyn said simply. It's true. Then why let him think it was his idea? Why let him believe he was the one making the choice? Evelyn considered how much to share with this woman who'd unknowingly been a pawn in the ending of her marriage. Because people like Victor need to believe they're in control. If I'd been the one to file for divorce first, he would have fought it out of pride. He would have made everything difficult just to prove he could. By letting him think he'd won, by letting him believe he'd traded up, I made the whole process much simpler. Scarlett shook her head slowly. That's actually kind of brilliant, and also really sad that you had to think that way. It was practical, Evelyn corrected. Now, what is it you came to warn me about? Scarlett took a deep breath. Victor's planning to contest the divorce. He's been meeting with different lawyers, trying to find one who will help him make the case that you're entitled to a large settlement, but only so he can use it as leverage to force you into signing an NDA about the marriage. I already refused to sign an NDA. I know. That's why he's changing tactics. He's going to try to make the divorce as expensive and complicated as possible, drag it out for months, maybe years, until you're so exhausted that you'll agree to his terms just to make it end. Evelyn felt a cold anger settle in her chest. It was so perfectly Victor, punishing her for refusing to play the role he'd assigned her, for daring to thrive without him. How do you know this? Because I was there when he was talking to his new lawyer. He doesn't know I speak Spanish, and his lawyer is from Colombia, and they were speaking pretty freely because they assumed I couldn't understand. Scarlett's smile was bitter. Turns out my 4 years of high school Spanish were good for something. What exactly did they say? That you're making him look bad by being so successful without him. That your refusal to take any money from the settlement is making people question whether you ever needed him at all. That your new opportunities, the Met Board, the consulting work, all of it, are damaging his reputation because they prove you were the valuable partner all along. Scarlett met Evelyn's eyes. He wants to force you into signing an agreement that prevents you from ever discussing your role in building his business, from claiming any credit for his success. He wants to legally erase your contributions. Evelyn sat very still, processing this information. It was exactly the kind of petty, short-sighted move Victor would make when he felt threatened. He wasn't thinking about what was best for either of them. He was thinking about protecting his ego. Why are you telling me this? She asked quietly. You're still with Victor, aren't you? Barely, Scarlett admitted, and not for much longer. After the gala, after seeing how those people looked at me, at us, I started realizing what Catherine tried to tell me. I'm not Victor's future. I'm his pattern, and I don't want to be anyone's pattern. So you're leaving him? I'm planning to, yes. But first I wanted to warn you, and I wanted to apologize. I knew he was married when we started seeing each other. I told myself it didn't matter because he said the marriage was already over, that you were basically roommates. But that was just me making excuses for doing something I knew was wrong. Evelyn studied the young woman in front of her, seeing not a threat or an enemy, but simply someone who'd learned a hard lesson. Thank you for the warning, and for the apology, though I'm not sure it was necessary. Victor was the one who made vows to me, not you. Still, Scarlett said, I'm sorry, for whatever that's worth. After Scarlett left, Evelyn sat alone in her office, watching the city lights begin to twinkle as evening settled over Manhattan. She picked up her phone and called Rebecca Chen. We need to talk, Evelyn said when her lawyer answered. Victor's planning to make this difficult. I need you to make it impossible for him to win. Rebecca's voice sharpened with interest. I'm listening. File an amendment to our divorce petition. I want it documented that I'm waiving all claims to community property, all rights to spousal support, and all financial ties to Victor Sterling or Sterling Development. I want it crystal clear that I'm leaving this marriage with exactly what I brought into it: my own assets, my own career, my own reputation. Evelyn, that's extremely generous. Some might say foolishly so. Then add one more thing, Evelyn continued. I want a clause stating that both parties acknowledge the marriage's professional collaboration and that any attempt to legally restrict or misrepresent either party's contributions to shared ventures will result in the immediate release of all financial records, business communications, and documented evidence of said collaboration. Rebecca was quiet for a moment. You're essentially creating a mutually assured destruction clause. Exactly. Victor can have his pride and his money and his business. But if he tries to erase my role in building it, I'll make sure everyone knows the truth, not out of spite, out of accuracy. I love it, Rebecca said with undisguised admiration. It's elegant, it's fair, and it completely neutralizes his strategy. He can't drag this out without looking petty, and he can't force you into silence without risking exposure. Evelyn, you've just checkmated him. Good, Evelyn said simply. How quickly can you file? Monday morning, first thing. After hanging up, Evelyn allowed herself a small smile. Victor had taught her a valuable lesson over the years, even if he'd never meant to. The most effective power moves were the ones that looked generous on the surface but were strategically brilliant underneath. She was giving him everything he thought he wanted: the money, the business, the freedom from financial obligation. But in doing so, she was also making it impossible for him to control the narrative about who they'd been together and what she'd contributed. It was perfect. It was final. It was exactly the ending she deserved. The amended divorce petition landed on Victor's desk the following Monday morning like a tactical strike. His attorney, Gerald Whitmore, no relation to the senator, though he encouraged the confusion, called within an hour, his voice tight with barely concealed frustration. Your wife's lawyer just filed the most unusual set of amendments I've seen in 20 years of family law, Gerald said without preamble. She's essentially giving you everything. Victor felt a surge of triumph that lasted approximately 3 seconds before Gerald continued. Everything except control of the narrative. She's created a clause that makes it legally hazardous for you to ever misrepresent her contributions to your business success. It's brilliant, actually. Diabolical, but brilliant. The triumph curdled into something cold and unpleasant in Victor's stomach. Explain. Gerald did, walking through each provision of Evelyn's amendment with the methodical precision of someone delivering bad news to a client who wouldn't want to hear it. By the time he finished, Victor was gripping the phone hard enough to make his knuckles white. So she's essentially saying I can have the money and the business, but if I try to claim sole credit for building Sterling Development, she'll release documentation proving otherwise? In essence, yes, though the language is more sophisticated than that. She's not threatening you, Victor. She's establishing a mutual non-disparagement clause that protects both parties' professional reputations. If you don't misrepresent her role, she has no reason to release anything. It's elegant, legally sound, and completely impossible to fight without looking petty. This is blackmail, Victor said flatly. No, it's strategy. And it's the kind of strategy that makes me wish she'd consulted me instead of Rebecca Chen. Your wife, your soon-to-be ex-wife, has effectively neutralized every leverage point we were planning to use. She's waived all financial claims, which means we can't use settlement negotiations to force concessions. She's willing to expedite the process, which means we can't drag it out until she's exhausted. And she's created a legal framework that protects her reputation without requiring anything from you except honesty. Victor stood and walked to his office window, looking out over the Manhattan skyline that had once felt like his kingdom. There has to be a way around this. There isn't. Trust me, I've spent the last hour looking for one. If we contest any part of this amendment, we look unreasonable. If we try to force an NDA about her professional contributions, we trigger the disclosure clause. If we drag out the proceedings, we're simply wasting time and money because she's not asking for anything we need to negotiate. So what are you telling me? That I should just sign whatever she wants? Gerald's sigh was audible over the phone. I'm telling you that your wife has outmaneuvered us completely. The smart play here is to accept her terms, finalize the divorce as quickly as possible, and move on with your life. Fighting this will only make you look vindictive and will probably damage your reputation further." After hanging up, Victor sat alone in his office, staring at the amended petition Rebecca Chen had so carefully crafted. Every word was chosen with surgical precision. Every clause served a dual purpose, appearing generous while being strategically unassailable. This was Evelyn at her finest. Not screaming or throwing accusations, not demanding her pound of flesh, just quietly, efficiently closing every door that might have allowed him to control how their story would be told. He thought about calling her, trying to negotiate some kind of compromise. But what would he even say? That he wanted the right to erase her from the narrative of his success? That he needed to legally prevent her from claiming credit for work she'd actually done? It would make him sound exactly like what he was beginning to fear he actually was. A man who'd built an empire on someone else's foundation and was now terrified people would realize it. His intercom buzzed. His assistant's voice was apologetic. "Mr. Sterling, Thomas Blackwood is on line 2. He says it's urgent." Victor's jaw tightened. Thomas had been increasingly distant since the gala, and urgent rarely meant good news in their business relationship. "Victor, we need to talk about the Riverside project," Thomas said without preamble. "I'm calling an emergency investor meeting for Wednesday afternoon. Your presence is mandatory." "What's this about? I thought we were on schedule." "We were, until 3 of our major investors pulled out last week, and 2 more are expressing concerns about project viability. The numbers don't work anymore, Victor. We're significantly undercapitalized, and the timeline we promised the city is no longer realistic." Victor felt his chest tighten. "I can find new investors. Give me 2 weeks." 2 weeks? Thomas's laugh was harsh. "Victor, do you have any idea how difficult it is to bring new money into a project that's already losing backing? Investors talk to each other. When people start pulling out, it creates a perception problem that's almost impossible to overcome." "Then what are you suggesting?" There was a pause on the other end of the line. When Thomas spoke again, his voice was carefully neutral. "I'm suggesting that you might want to consider bringing in a partner with stronger institutional relationships. Someone the remaining investors trust. Someone with credibility in the cultural and civic communities we're trying to build relationships with." The implication hung in the air between them, unspoken but crystal clear. "You want me to bring Evelyn into the project," Victor said flatly. "I want you to consider all options for saving $1 billion development that currently has a very real chance of collapsing. And yes, one of those options is approaching your soon-to-be ex-wife, who happens to have exactly the kind of relationships and reputation that could restore investor confidence." "That's insane. We're getting divorced." "I'm aware. I'm also aware that business and personal matters don't always have to intersect. Evelyn is a professional with expertise in cultural development and institutional relationships. The fact that you were married to her is, from a business perspective, irrelevant." "Except it's not irrelevant," Victor said, his voice rising. "She would never agree to work with me. Not after everything that's happened." "Then perhaps you should ask her," Thomas suggested. "Or better yet, perhaps I should ask her. Because right now, Victor, you have 2 choices. Find a way to save this project, or watch it implode and take a significant portion of your professional reputation with it." The line went dead. Victor sat in the silence of his office, feeling the walls close in. The Riverside project was supposed to be his crowning achievement, the development that would cement his legacy as more than just a successful real estate developer. It was supposed to be transformative, culturally significant, the kind of project people would study in urban planning courses for decades. And it was falling apart because the people who'd believed in it had actually believed in Evelyn. He picked up his phone, scrolled to her number, then set it down again. What would he even say? "Hi, I know I left you for a younger woman and tried to erase your contributions to my success, but could you please save my failing development project?" The worst part was knowing she probably could save it. One lunch with the right people, one consultation meeting with wavering investors, one strategic phone call to the cultural institutions they were trying to partner with. Evelyn could probably stabilize the entire project in a week. But why would she? He had given her absolutely no reason to help him. He'd humiliated her publicly, underestimated her professionally, and attempted to legally erase her accomplishments. And in response, she'd simply stepped aside and built her own thriving career while his empire showed its first serious cracks. His office door opened without a knock. His mother swept in wearing Chanel and disapproval in equal measure. We need to talk, Catherine said, settling into the chair across from his desk without waiting for an invitation. I just had lunch with Margaret Blackwood, who mentioned that the Riverside project is in trouble. She also mentioned that Thomas suggested bringing Evelyn in as a consultant, and that you're apparently too proud to consider it. Mother, I really don't need— What you need, Catherine interrupted, is a reality check. Your marriage is over, Victor. That ship has sailed, sunk, and been forgotten. But your business doesn't have to go down with it. Evelyn is a professional. If you approach this correctly, she might be willing to consult on the project purely from a business perspective. You can't be serious. You want me to ask my ex-wife to save my business? I want you to ask a highly qualified professional with expertise in cultural development and institutional relationships to consult on a project that desperately needs her skill set. The fact that she used to be your wife is, frankly, less relevant than you think. Victor laughed bitterly. She'll never agree. Why would she? I've given her every reason to want to watch me fail. Catherine's expression softened slightly. Actually, darling, I don't think Evelyn wants you to fail. I think she's simply moved on. There's a difference. Hatred requires energy and attention. Evelyn has better things to do with both. So you're saying she doesn't care enough about me to even enjoy my failure? I'm saying she's focused on her own success rather than your destruction, which, if you think about it strategically, creates an opportunity. If she's not motivated by revenge, she might be motivated by professional interest. The Riverside Project is exactly the kind of cultural development work she excels at. Approach her correctly, and she might see it as a portfolio piece rather than a favor to you. Victor studied his mother's face, looking for signs of manipulation or hidden agenda. You've talked to her, haven't you? You and Evelyn have been discussing this. We had lunch last week, Catherine admitted, and we discussed many things, including the fact that you're apparently determined to make this divorce as difficult as possible for reasons neither of us can fathom. But we did not discuss the Riverside Project. That suggestion is coming from me, based on pure business logic. And if I approach her? What do I say? You acknowledge her expertise. You present it as a professional opportunity, not a personal favor. You offer appropriate compensation for her consulting services. And most importantly, you leave your ego at the door and treat her with the respect you should have been showing her all along. The idea sat uncomfortably in Victor's mind, but he couldn't deny the logic. The project was dying. Evelyn could probably save it. And if he approached it correctly, purely as business, maybe she'd consider it. I'll think about it, he said finally. Don't think too long, Catherine advised, standing to leave. From what Margaret tells me, you have about 2 weeks before the remaining investors start jumping ship. After that, the project is unsalvageable. After his mother left, Victor spent the rest of the afternoon reviewing the Riverside Project files, looking at them with fresh eyes. How many of the original investor relationships had come through Evelyn's connections? How many of the cultural partnerships had been facilitated by her reputation and contacts? More than he'd realized, far more than he'd ever acknowledged. The truth was brutal but undeniable. He'd been taking credit for work that was fundamentally collaborative, and now that the collaboration had ended, the cracks were showing. His phone rang. Scarlett. We need to talk, she said when he answered, her voice flat and determined. Not now, Scarlett. I'm breaking up with you, she said, cutting through his excuse. I wanted to tell you in person, but honestly, I don't think I can look at you right now without feeling disgusted with both of us. Victor felt something twist in his chest. Not heartbreak exactly, but a recognition that yet another thing was falling apart. Scarlett, whatever you heard or whoever talked to you, your mother called me. So did Evelyn, actually. They both explained some things I should have figured out on my own, like how I'm the fourth affair you've had in 5 years. Like how you told all of us the exact same story about your dead marriage and your boring wife. Like how you're absolutely going to do the same thing to me eventually because this is just your pattern. That's not fair. What we have is different. It's not different, Victor. I'm not different. I'm just younger and dumber and more willing to believe your lies. But I'm done now. I'm going back to Chicago, back to my actual life, and I'm going to try very hard to forget I ever met you. Scarlett, please. One more thing, she continued, her voice shaking slightly. I told Evelyn about your plan to drag out the divorce. I know you're probably angry about that, but honestly, I don't care. She deserves better than what you're trying to do to her, and I deserved better than being your midlife crisis. The line went dead. Victor sat in the gathering darkness of his office, surrounded by the trappings of success that suddenly felt hollow. His marriage was ending. His mistress had left him. His business was failing. And the only person who could possibly help him salvage any of it was the woman he'd spent the last few months systematically underestimating and undervaluing. The irony would have been funny if it wasn't so devastating. He looked at his phone again, pulled up Evelyn's contact information, and stared at her name for a long moment. Then, before he could talk himself out of it, he typed out a message. "I need to speak with you about a business matter. Would you be available for a meeting this week? Professional capacity only." He sent it before he could overthink the wording, then waited, phone in hand, for a response that might not come. 20 minutes passed, then 30, then an hour. Finally, just as he was about to give up and leave for the night, his phone buzzed. "I'm available Thursday at 2 p.m., my office at the Silvercrest Foundation. Please confirm if this works for you." No warmth, no personal acknowledgement, just professional courtesy and clear boundaries. Victor typed back, "Thursday at 2 works. Thank you." Her response was immediate. "See you then." He spent the next 3 days preparing for that meeting like it was the most important pitch of his career, which, in many ways, it was. He reviewed every aspect of the Riverside project, identified exactly where Evelyn's expertise would be most valuable, and crafted an offer that was genuinely professional rather than manipulatively personal. He also, at his mother's insistence, met with a therapist to discuss why he'd made the choices he'd made and what he actually wanted from his life going forward. That session was uncomfortable in ways Victor hadn't anticipated, forcing him to confront patterns of behavior he'd spent years justifying or ignoring. "You seem to have a habit of devaluing things once you possess them," Dr. Morrison observed, her tone neutral but her words cutting. "Your marriage, your wife's contributions, even your own achievements once they're no longer novel. That's worth examining if you want to avoid repeating these patterns." Thursday arrived cold and gray, with the kind of November wind that made Manhattan feel like an urban wind tunnel. Victor arrived at the Silvercrest Foundation offices 10 minutes early, was shown to a conference room by a polite assistant, and waited with increasing nervousness for Evelyn to appear. She walked in at exactly 2 p.m., wearing a charcoal gray suit that managed to be both professional and elegant. Her hair was pulled back, her makeup minimal, her entire demeanor radiating competent professionalism. She looked nothing like the wife he'd left and everything like the successful consultant he was about to ask for help. "Victor," she said, extending her hand for a businesslike handshake, "thank you for being punctual." Her hand was cool and impersonal in his. "Thank you for meeting with me." They sat across from each other at the conference table, and Evelyn pulled out a leather portfolio, opening it to a blank legal pad. "You mentioned a business matter. I have another meeting at 3:30, so let's make this efficient." No small talk, no acknowledgement of their personal history, just business. Victor took a breath and began. "The Riverside Development Project is in trouble. We've lost 3 major investors, and the remaining partners are questioning project viability. Thomas Blackwood suggested that bringing in a consultant with expertise in cultural development and institutional relationships might help stabilize the situation. Your name came up." Evelyn's expression didn't change. "And you want to hire me as a consultant?" "I want to explore whether you'd be interested in consulting on the project. Yes. This would be a professional arrangement with appropriate compensation and clearly defined scope. Your expertise in arts institutions, cultural programming, and community partnerships would be valuable for the mixed-use cultural components of the development." "I see." Evelyn made a note on her legal pad. "What's your timeline?" "We need to restore investor confidence within 2 weeks, or the project likely collapses. The city's already expressing concerns about our ability to deliver on promised timelines and community benefits. And you think I can fix this in 2 weeks?" "I think you have relationships and credibility that could help. Whether you choose to use them on this project is your decision." Evelyn studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. "Let me make sure I understand this correctly. You want me to use my professional relationships, many of which you've spent months implying were actually your relationships, to save a project that's failing partly because those relationships were never actually yours to begin with?" Victor felt his face heat. "When you put it that way, how would you put it?" Evelyn's voice was calm, almost curious. Because from where I'm sitting, this looks like a perfect example of what we're currently dealing with in the divorce. You benefited from my work and connections, took them for granted, and now that I'm no longer doing that work for free as your wife, you're discovering exactly how valuable my contributions actually were. You're right, Victor said, the admission surprising himself as much as it clearly surprised Evelyn. You're absolutely right. I did take your contributions for granted. I did benefit from your relationships while simultaneously undervaluing your role in creating them. And I did spend years convincing myself that your work was somehow less important than mine because it wasn't as visible or direct. Evelyn's eyebrows rose fractionally. That's unexpectedly honest. My therapist suggested I try honesty as a strategy. Apparently, I've been avoiding it for years. A hint of amusement flickered across Evelyn's face before she returned to professional neutrality. All right, I appreciate the candor, even if it's therapeutically motivated. Now let me be equally honest. I have absolutely no interest in saving your project out of charity or nostalgia or any misguided desire to prove I can fix your problems. I understand. I'm not finished, Evelyn said calmly. However, I do have professional interest in the Riverside development itself. The cultural components you're planning, the community arts center, the performance spaces, the public art installations, those align with work I'm already doing. If approached correctly, consulting on this project could benefit my portfolio and professional reputation, independent of any connection to you. Victor felt hope flicker in his chest. So you'd consider it? Under very specific conditions, Evelyn said, ticking off points on her fingers. First, this engagement would be documented as a professional consulting contract with Evelyn Laurent. That's my new legal name, by the way. No references to our previous relationship, no assumptions of access or familiarity beyond what's professional. Agreed. Second, my compensation would be market rate for consultants at my level, which, for your information, is significantly higher than you probably think. Rebecca will negotiate the contract terms, and I won't accept anything less than what my expertise is actually worth. That's fair? Third, I have full autonomy in how I approach this work. You don't get to question my methods, second-guess my recommendations, or undermine my credibility with investors or partners. If you hire me, you trust my expertise. Period. Yes, absolutely. And fourth, Evelyn's gaze locked with his, when this project succeeds, and it will succeed if I take it on, you will publicly acknowledge my role in that success. Not as your ex-wife who helped out, but as a professional consultant whose expertise was essential to project viability. Is that clear? Victor nodded slowly, recognizing this for what it was. Evelyn establishing her professional reputation completely separate from him, while simultaneously making him acknowledge what he'd spent years denying. It's clear, he said, and it's more than fair. Evelyn made another note on her legal pad. All right, send me the complete project documentation. All of it, not just the public-facing materials. I want financials, investor agreements, partnership contracts, community benefit commitments, everything. I'll review it over the weekend and let you know Monday whether I'm willing to take this on. Thank you, Victor said, meaning it. I know this is awkward given our circumstances. Our circumstances are that we're getting divorced, which happens to millions of people every year without preventing them from conducting business professionally, Evelyn said, closing her portfolio. The awkwardness is only an issue if we make it one. I'm choosing not to. I suggest you do the same. She stood, indicating the meeting was over. Victor stood as well, suddenly not wanting her to leave, wanting to extend this conversation into something more personal, more familiar. Evelyn, he started, not even sure what he wanted to say. Thursday at 2:30, she said, checking her watch. Your next meeting, I assume, is the investor update Thomas mentioned. You should probably prepare for that rather than whatever you were about to say to me. She was right, of course, but he said it anyway. I'm sorry for all of it, for not seeing what I had, for taking you for granted, for being the kind of husband you had to strategically manage rather than genuinely partner with. You deserve better, and I failed to give it to you. Evelyn paused at the door, her hand on the handle. When she turned back, her expression was softer than it had been all meeting, touched with something that might have been sadness. Thank you for saying that, she said quietly. But Victor, apologies work better when they're accompanied by actual change. And from what I can see, you're still the same person making the same choices, just with a different woman and a failing business instead of a functioning marriage. I'm trying to change. The therapy, this meeting, acknowledging my mistakes, are all good steps, Evelyn agreed. But they're just steps, Victor. Real change takes time and consistent effort and a willingness to be uncomfortable while you figure out who you actually want to be. I hope you find that, genuinely. But it's not my job to help you anymore. She left, closing the door quietly behind her. Victor stood alone in the conference room, feeling the weight of what she'd said. She was right, of course. She was right about almost everything, which was part of why losing her felt like such a monumental mistake. But she'd also left the door open to working together professionally, which was more than he'd had any right to expect. He spent the rest of the afternoon compiling documentation for Evelyn's review, making sure she had access to everything she'd need to make an informed decision. Then he headed to his investor meeting with Thomas Blackwood, where he faced 2 hours of difficult questions and uncomfortable admissions about project viability. We have a potential consultant reviewing the project this weekend, Victor told the assembled investors, keeping his voice steady despite the scrutiny. Someone with extensive experience in cultural development and institutional partnerships. If she agrees to join the team, I believe we can address your concerns about community engagement and cultural programming. Who is this consultant? One of the investors asked. Victor took a breath. Evelyn Laurent. She's currently on the board of the Metropolitan Museum's Acquisitions Committee and serves as senior advisor to the Silvercrest Foundation's cultural programs. She has relationships with every major arts institution in the city and expertise in exactly the kind of public-private partnerships this project requires. The room went very quiet. Then Margaret Blackwood, Thomas's wife, spoke up from her seat at the far end of the table. Evelyn Laurent, she repeated thoughtfully. Wasn't she Evelyn Sterling until recently, your wife? Yes, Victor said evenly. We're currently divorcing, but this is a professional engagement based entirely on her expertise and reputation in cultural development. Our personal situation is separate from her professional qualifications. Another investor, David Chen, leaned forward. And she's actually agreed to work with you on this, given the circumstances? She's reviewing the project documentation and will make her decision Monday. I can't promise she'll take it on, but if she does, I can promise you'll see immediate positive impact on our institutional relationships and community partnerships. Thomas caught his eye and gave a small nod of approval. Victor had handled that as well as could be expected, acknowledging the elephant in the room while maintaining professional focus. The meeting concluded with tentative agreement to wait for Evelyn's decision before making any final judgments about project viability. It wasn't the vote of confidence Victor had hoped for, but it was enough to keep the project alive for another week. As investors filed out, Margaret Blackwood approached him with her characteristic directness. That took courage, she said simply, admitting you need Evelyn's help, acknowledging her expertise publicly. Your pride must be screaming. It is, Victor admitted. But my business sense is screaming louder. This project needs her skills. I was an idiot to ever think otherwise. Well, better late than never, I suppose. Though if I were Evelyn, I'm not sure I'd help you even for professional reasons. You've put her through quite a lot. I know, but I'm hoping she'll see past our history to the merit of the project itself. Margaret smiled slightly. Between you and me? She will. Evelyn's too good at what she does to let personal feelings interfere with a professionally interesting opportunity. But don't mistake her professionalism for forgiveness, Victor. She's helping because the work matters to her, not because she's giving you a second chance. I understand that. Do you? Margaret's gaze was penetrating. Because from where I stand, it looks like you're finally starting to understand what you lost. And that's not nothing. But understanding what you lost isn't the same as changing who you are. Evelyn's moved on. The question is whether you can move on too, or whether you'll spend the next few years trying to recapture something that was never as good as you now remember it being. She left him with that uncomfortable truth. Victor drove home through Manhattan traffic, her words echoing in his mind. His penthouse apartment felt emptier than usual. No Scarlett waiting with wine and questions about his day. No prospect of Evelyn's quiet competence organizing their social calendar or discussing foundation business over dinner. Just him, alone, with the consequences of choices he was only now beginning to fully understand. His phone buzzed with a text from his mother. Heard the meeting went reasonably well. Proud of you for being honest about needing Evelyn's help. That couldn't have been easy. He typed back, It wasn't, but it was necessary. Catherine's response came immediately. Necessary is often the opposite of easy, but it's usually the right choice anyway. Now get some rest. You look exhausted. Victor smiled despite himself. His mother had always known exactly what he needed to hear, even when it wasn't what he wanted to hear. He poured himself a modest scotch and stood at his windows, looking out over the city that had once felt like his playground. Somewhere out there, Evelyn was probably reviewing project documents, approaching his crisis with the same methodical competence she brought to everything. And Monday, she would decide whether his project, and by extension a significant piece of his professional reputation, was worth saving. For the first time in years, Victor Sterling's fate was in someone else's hands. And those hands belonged to the woman he'd spent their entire marriage taking for granted. The scotch was smooth going down, but it did nothing to ease the knot of anxiety and regret that had taken up permanent residence in his chest. Monday morning arrived with the kind of crystalline winter sunlight that made Manhattan's skyline look like something from a postcard. Evelyn sat in her home office, not the Hamptons estate she'd once shared with Victor, but a beautifully restored brownstone in the West Village that she'd purchased 3 months ago with her own money, reviewing her notes on the Riverside project one final time. She'd spent the entire weekend buried in documentation, and what she'd found was both worse and better than she'd expected. The project itself was solid, even visionary in its ambition to create genuinely accessible cultural spaces in a neighborhood that desperately needed them. The community benefits were real, not just PR window dressing. The architectural plans were stunning, but the execution strategy was a disaster. Victor had approached the project like a pure real estate deal, focusing on timelines and profit margins while completely underestimating the complexity of building authentic partnerships with cultural institutions and community organizations. He'd made promises to the city about programming and access that he had no realistic plan for delivering. He'd alienated potential partners with his characteristic impatience and unwillingness to cede control. In short, he'd tried to build a cultural landmark using the same bulldozer tactics that worked for luxury condominiums, and he was now shocked that it wasn't working. Evelyn could fix it. She knew exactly which relationships to activate, which promises to renegotiate, which partnerships to prioritize. She could probably stabilize the investor situation within a week and have preliminary community partnerships in place within a month. The question was whether she should. Her phone rang. Rebecca Chen, calling right on schedule. Please tell me you're not actually considering taking this job, Rebecca said without preamble. Please tell me you spent the weekend realizing what a terrible idea it would be to professionally entangle yourself with your soon-to-be ex-husband. Good morning to you too, Rebecca. Evelyn, I'm serious. You have zero obligation to save Victor's failing project. You've already been more than generous in the divorce settlement. You don't owe him anything, professionally or personally. I don't, Evelyn agreed. But I might owe it to myself to take on an interesting project that aligns with my expertise and could significantly enhance my professional portfolio. Rebecca was quiet for a moment. You're actually going to do this, aren't you? I'm considering it. The project itself is worthwhile, Rebecca. The community would genuinely benefit from what they're trying to build. And if I can make that happen while also establishing my reputation as a top-tier cultural development consultant completely independent of Victor Sterling, why shouldn't I? Because working with your ex-husband is emotionally complicated and potentially professionally risky. Because if the project fails despite your involvement, your reputation takes a hit. Because Victor has a documented history of taking credit for your work, and a consulting contract doesn't guarantee he won't do it again. Which is why the contract you're about to negotiate will include ironclad provisions about credit, attribution, and public acknowledgement of my role, Evelyn said calmly. I'm not going into this blind, Rebecca. I know exactly who Victor is and what he's capable of, but I also know my own worth and what I can deliver. This project needs me more than I need it, which means I get to dictate terms. She could hear Rebecca's reluctant smile through the phone. You've really thought this through. I spent 15 years being underestimated by my husband. I'm not about to make the same mistake with myself. Now, are you ready to discuss contract terms, or would you prefer to keep trying to talk me out of this? Contract terms, Rebecca said with a sigh. But I want it on record that I think you're being far too generous to a man who doesn't deserve your expertise or your time. Noted. Now, here's what I want. They spent the next hour hammering out an agreement that protected Evelyn's interests while giving her the autonomy she needed to actually do the work. Market rate compensation plus performance bonuses tied to measurable outcomes. Complete creative control over community partnerships and cultural programming. Mandatory public acknowledgement of her role in all investor communications and press releases. And a termination clause that allowed her to walk away immediately if Victor interfered with her professional judgment. "This is bulletproof," Rebecca said with satisfaction when they'd finished. "If Victor signs this, he's essentially admitting that you're the expert and he's just the money. His ego must be in tatters." "His ego is the least of my concerns," Evelyn said. "Send the contract over. I want his signature by end of business today." After hanging up, Evelyn drafted an email to Victor, professional, concise, and carefully devoid of anything personal. "Victor, I've reviewed the Riverside documentation and am willing to consult on the project under specific terms. My attorney will send over the contract this morning. If you can execute it by 5 p.m. today, I can begin work immediately. If not, I'll assume you've decided to pursue other options. Best regards, Evelyn Laurent." She sent it before she could second-guess the decision, then turned her attention to the rest of her day. She had a conference call with the Met's Acquisitions Committee at 10, lunch with a potential gallery partner at noon, and a foundation board meeting at 3. Her calendar was full of work that had nothing to do with Victor Sterling, and that felt exactly right. At 10:47 a.m., her phone pinged with Victor's response. "Contract received and under review with my attorney. We'll have answer by deadline. Thank you for considering this. VS formal, cautious, smart enough not to presume anything." Evelyn returned to her work, deliberately putting the Riverside decision out of her mind. She'd made her offer. Whether Victor accepted her terms was his choice, and either outcome was fine with her. She had plenty of other opportunities that didn't involve her ex-husband. The Met call went well. They were discussing a potential acquisition of a significant collection of modernist works, and Evelyn's expertise in authentication and provenance was proving invaluable. Lunch was even better, with the Paris gallery owner, Adrienne Laurent, proving to be not only professionally interesting but personally charming in a way that felt entirely different from Victor's calculated charisma. "You're certain about taking your mother's maiden name?" Adrienne asked over Dover Soleil, his French accent adding music to the question. "It's a beautiful name, of course, but I imagine it must feel strange to change something so fundamental." "Actually, it feels liberating," Evelyn said honestly. "Evelyn Ashford was who I was before I tried to fit myself into someone else's vision of who I should be. Evelyn Sterling was the compromise version. Evelyn Laurent feels like the synthesis, honoring where I came from while creating something new." Adrienne smiled, and Evelyn noticed, not for the first time, that his smile reached his eyes in a way Victor's rarely had. "I like that. The synthesis. It's very much how I think about curation, actually, taking elements from different traditions and creating something that honors the past while being unmistakably contemporary." They talked for another hour about potential collaboration, about the possibility of Evelyn consulting on acquisitions for his Paris gallery, about the growing market for American artists and European collections. It was stimulating, intellectually engaging, and refreshingly free of the complicated emotional subtext that had characterized her conversations with Victor for years. As they were finishing coffee, Evelyn's phone buzzed with an email notification. "Rebecca, contract signed and returned. He agreed to everything, and I mean everything. Either he's desperate or he's finally figured out what you're actually worth. Probably both. Let me know if you want me to review anything before you start work. RC." Evelyn felt a complex mix of emotions settle in her chest. Satisfaction at being valued appropriately, anticipation at tackling a genuinely interesting challenge, and a tiny, almost imperceptible thread of sadness that it had taken divorce and professional desperation for Victor to finally see her clearly. "Good news?" Adrienne asked, noting her expression. "Professional news," Evelyn corrected with a slight smile. "I just agreed to consult on a major development project here in the city. It's going to be time-consuming, but potentially very rewarding." "Then I should make my proposal before your calendar becomes impossible," Adrienne said, his eyes warm. I'm hosting a small gathering at my gallery this Friday evening. Very intimate, just a dozen colleagues and friends. I would be honored if you'd attend. And if you're interested, we could discuss the consulting arrangement in more detail over dinner afterward. It had been so long since Evelyn had been invited somewhere purely because someone enjoyed her company, not because she was Victor Sterling's wife providing social currency. The invitation felt like a small miracle. "I'd love to," she said, meaning it. "Though I should warn you, I'm technically still married for another few weeks, so if you're looking for anything beyond professional collaboration, I'm looking to get to know a fascinating woman whose expertise I admire and whose company I enjoy," Adrian said simply. "Whatever else develops, or doesn't, I'm patient enough to let it unfold naturally." They parted with plans to connect later in the week, and Evelyn walked back to her brownstone feeling lighter than she had in months. Maybe years. This was what life could be like when she wasn't constantly managing someone else's ego or compensating for their shortcomings. This was what it felt like to be valued for exactly who she was. She spent the rest of the afternoon at the Foundation board meeting where they discussed expansion plans for the Creative Futures initiative. The program was already exceeding expectations, with applications pouring in from talented young people who would never have had access to serious arts education without the scholarships. "This is what you should be spending your time on," Catherine Harrison said after the meeting, catching Evelyn alone in the corridor. "Programs like this that actually change lives, not saving your ex-husband's real estate ventures." Evelyn smiled at her mentor's directness. "You heard about the Riverside Project?" "Darling, everyone has heard about the Riverside Project. The question is why you're agreeing to work with Victor after everything he's put you through." "Because the project is good for the community," Evelyn said honestly. "And because proving I can succeed in cultural development work completely separate from any association with Victor Sterling is worth the short-term inconvenience of working with him." Catherine studied her carefully. "You're using him to establish your independence from him. That's either brilliant or emotionally dangerous. Possibly both." "Probably both," Evelyn agreed. "But Catherine, I spent 15 years being defined by my relationship to Victor. I'm done with that. If working on this project and succeeding spectacularly helps me establish Evelyn Laurent as a force in cultural development independent of anyone's wife or ex-wife status, then it's worth it." Just promise me something," Catherine said seriously. "Promise me you won't let him take credit again. Don't let your professionalism become another way for him to exploit your generosity." "I won't," Evelyn said firmly. "The contract is ironclad, and I'm not the same woman who let him minimize my contributions for years. I know my worth now. I'm not forgetting it again." That evening, Evelyn sat in her West Village brownstone's cozy library, surrounded by books on urban development, cultural programming, and community engagement. She was drafting her initial strategy for the Riverside Project when her phone rang. Victor. She considered not answering, then decided that establishing clear professional boundaries started with clear professional communication. "Evelyn Laurent speaking." "Evelyn, it's Victor. I wanted to thank you for agreeing to consult on the project. I know the contract terms were aggressive, but I signed them because they're fair and because I recognize that this project needs your expertise more than you need this project." It was possibly the most self-aware thing she'd ever heard him say. "I appreciate that," she said carefully. "And I want to be clear about expectations. This is a professional engagement, Victor. I'm doing this because the work interests me and because I believe in what the project could be for the community. Not because of any residual feelings about our relationship." "I understand, completely. I just wanted you to know that I'm grateful, and that I meant what I said last week. I'm sorry for how I treated you during our marriage, for taking you for granted, for not seeing what I had until I'd already lost it." Evelyn closed her eyes, feeling the complexity of emotions his words stirred up. Vindication that he finally understood. Sadness for all the wasted years, relief that it was ending, and underneath it all, a strange kind of peace. "Thank you for saying that," she said quietly. "But Victor, we need to establish something right now. This project is business. Our divorce is business. Whatever personal feelings either of us might have about what our marriage was or wasn't, those can't enter into our professional interactions. Can you do that?" There was a pause on the other end of the line. "I can try." "That's not good enough. I need you to be certain. Because if you can't separate the personal from the professional, this won't work, and I'll terminate the contract immediately." "Then, yes," Victor said firmly. Yes, I can do that. I will do that. Good. Then let's discuss the project. I've reviewed all the documentation, and we need to have a serious conversation about your approach to community partnerships. You've been treating cultural institutions like real estate deals, and it's not working. She spent the next 40 minutes walking him through her preliminary analysis, pointing out exactly where his strategy had failed and what needed to change. To his credit, Victor listened without interrupting, asked intelligent questions, and accepted her critiques without defensiveness. So basically, I've been an arrogant idiot who thought money and timelines were more important than relationships and trust, Victor said when she finished. Essentially, yes, but the good news is that it's fixable if you're willing to let me lead on the cultural and community engagement aspects. Your job is to handle the financial and construction logistics. My job is to build the partnerships that make this project meaningful rather than just profitable. I can live with that division of labor, Victor said. When do you want to start? Tomorrow. I'll need access to your investor communications, partnership contracts, and community benefit commitments. I also want to schedule separate meetings with the key stakeholders, the cultural institutions you've approached, the community organizations, the city planning office. I need to understand what promises you've made and what expectations you've created. I'll have everything sent over tonight. And Evelyn? Thank you. Genuinely. I know I don't deserve your help, but I'm grateful for it anyway. You're welcome, she said simply. But Victor, remember, this is business. I'm not saving you. I'm building my own professional reputation while also creating something valuable for the community. Your project just happens to be the vehicle. After hanging up, Evelyn sat in the quiet of her library, processing the conversation. It had felt good to be direct, to set clear boundaries, to establish herself as the expert Victor needed rather than the wife he'd taken for granted. This was progress. This was healing. This was what moving forward looked like. Over the next 2 weeks, Evelyn threw herself into the Riverside project with the same intensity she brought to everything she cared about. She scheduled meetings with every stakeholder Victor had alienated, approaching each conversation with genuine curiosity about their concerns and creative problem-solving about solutions. The director of the Brooklyn Arts Collective, Marcus Thompson, had been particularly frustrated by Victor's approach. He kept talking about activating the space and maximizing cultural programming like we were widgets in his development plan, Marcus explained over coffee. He never once asked what the community actually needs or wants, just assumed his vision was the right vision. What does the community need? Evelyn asked simply. Marcus blinked, clearly surprised by the question. You're really asking? I'm really asking, because if we're going to build something meaningful, it needs to serve the people who'll actually use it, not just look good in investor presentations. That conversation led to a completely redesigned approach to the Community Arts Center, with programming developed in partnership with local organizations rather than imposed from above. Marcus became an enthusiastic advocate for the project, bringing credibility and trust that Victor could never have purchased. Similar conversations with the Museum of Contemporary Art, the Public Theater, and 3 community organizations yielded similar results. Evelyn listened more than she talked, incorporated feedback into revised plans, and built genuine partnerships based on mutual respect rather than transactional exchanges. Within 10 days, she'd transformed the project's reputation from tone-deaf real estate venture to genuine community collaboration. Investor confidence stabilized. New funding sources emerged. The city planning office shifted from skeptical to cautiously optimistic. And through it all, Victor kept his word. He stayed in his lane, focused on construction logistics and financial management, and let Evelyn lead on everything related to cultural programming and community engagement. In their twice-weekly coordination meetings, he was professional, deferential to her expertise, and careful not to overstep boundaries. It was, Evelyn thought with some irony, the best their working relationship had ever been, probably because they were no longer trying to be married while also being colleagues. You're doing incredible work on this project, Thomas Blackwood said during a stakeholder meeting in the 3rd week. I have to admit I was skeptical about bringing you in, not because of your qualifications, but because of the potential awkwardness with Victor. But you've both been remarkably professional. That's because we're treating this as what it is, Evelyn said simply, a business engagement between professionals. Our personal history is irrelevant to the work. Still, it can't be easy. Evelyn considered that. It's easier than staying married to someone who couldn't see my value would have been. This way, at least my contributions are documented, compensated, and publicly acknowledged. I'll take professional respect over personal intimacy any day if those are my only options. Thomas nodded slowly. You know, Margaret was right about you. She said you were the most underestimated person in New York society, and that anyone smart enough to recognize your actual worth would benefit enormously from working with you. Your wife is a wise woman. She is, which is why I'm going to make you an offer you'll probably refuse, but I hope you'll consider. I'm developing a proposal for a major cultural district in Lower Manhattan, much bigger scope than Riverside. I'd like you to come on as lead consultant for the entire project. Not as a favor, not because of any connection to Victor, but because you're the best person for the job. Evelyn felt her pulse quicken. This was the kind of opportunity that could define a career. Thomas, I'm honored, but I'm currently committed to seeing the Riverside project through to completion. I know. I'm talking about after that. Riverside wraps up in what, another 2 months? This new project wouldn't kick off until spring anyway. Think about it. Discuss it with your attorney. And let me know if you're interested in building something truly transformative. He left her with a preliminary proposal document that outlined a project roughly 10 times the scale of Riverside, with cultural components that would reshape how an entire neighborhood engaged with arts and community programming. Evelyn read through it that evening in her brownstone library, her mind already racing with possibilities. This was what she'd always wanted, work that mattered, projects that made a real difference, recognition for her actual expertise rather than her marital status. And it was all happening because she'd finally chosen herself over the comfortable cage of being Victor Sterling's wife. Her phone buzzed with a text from Adrienne Laurent. They'd been corresponding regularly since the gallery event the previous week, professional conversations that occasionally drifted into personal territory with an ease that felt both natural and slightly terrifying. How's the project going? I hope Victor is behaving himself professionally. She typed back. Project's going well. Victor is surprisingly professional when his ego isn't involved. And I just got offered an even bigger opportunity for the spring. His response was immediate. Congratulations, this calls for celebration. Dinner. Friday? I know a place in Soho that does an excellent coq au vin. Evelyn hesitated only briefly before responding. I'd love that. Friday at 7? Perfect. I'll make reservations. And Evelyn, I'm proud of you for taking your life back, for building something new, for being brave enough to choose yourself. She stared at that message for a long moment, feeling something warm and unfamiliar bloom in her chest. When was the last time someone had been proud of her just for being herself? When had anyone celebrated her choices without trying to shape them to their own agenda? Thank you, she typed back. That means more than you know. The divorce papers were finalized the following Tuesday morning. Rebecca called with the news while Evelyn was reviewing partnership contracts for the Riverside project. It's done, Rebecca said simply. Judge signed off on everything. As of today, you are officially Evelyn Laurent, single woman and free agent. How do you feel? Evelyn took a slow breath, checking in with herself honestly. Relieved, lighter, and maybe a little sad, but not for the reasons Victor would probably think. I'm sad for the years I wasted. But I'm not sad, it's over. That's healthy. And Evelyn, the settlement terms mean you're walking away with your full inheritance intact, plus all your separate property and investments. You're in excellent financial shape, completely independent of Victor. I know, that was always the plan. Still, it must feel good to have it confirmed. You don't need him for anything, financially, socially, or professionally. You did it. You got out with your dignity intact and your future unlimited. After hanging up, Evelyn sat quietly in her office, letting the reality settle over her. She was divorced, single for the first time in 15 years, free to build whatever life she wanted without compromise or negotiation or strategic management of someone else's ego. The possibility felt simultaneously terrifying and exhilarating. Her phone rang again. Victor. Rebecca just called me, he said without preamble. The divorce is final. Yes. I know this is what we both wanted, but I felt like I should, mark the occasion somehow. Acknowledge the end of something that was significant, even if it didn't work out. Evelyn felt an unexpected wave of compassion for the man on the other end of the line. He sounded lost, uncertain, very different from the confident developer who'd walked into charity galas with mistresses on his arm. "We had some good years," she said honestly. "In the beginning, before we started wanting different things, before we stopped being partners and became something else. I don't regret marrying you, Victor. I just regret staying married for longer than we should have. I regret a lot more than that," Victor said quietly. "I regret not seeing you, not valuing you, not being the partner you deserved. I regret that it took losing you to understand what I had. Victor, I know you've moved on. I know this is just business between us now. I know I don't get to ask for second chances or forgiveness or anything beyond professional courtesy. I just wanted you to know that I finally understand. And I'm sorry it took me so long to get there." Evelyn felt tears prick at her eyes, not from sadness exactly, but from the complex emotional weight of endings. "I hope you find what you're looking for, Victor. I hope you become the person you're capable of being. And I hope you find someone who wants the same things you want, so you don't have to compromise or pretend or manage each other's expectations. What about you? What do you hope for yourself? I hope I keep building this life I'm creating. I hope I keep choosing work that matters and people who value me. I hope I stop being afraid of wanting more. And I hope I remember that I'm enough, exactly as I am, without needing to be anyone's wife or partner or supporting character." "You are," Victor said, his voice rough with emotion. "You're more than enough. I was the one who was never quite enough for you. I just didn't realize it until it was too late." They ended the call with awkward goodbyes and mutual wishes for future happiness that were genuine even if unlikely to be fulfilled. Evelyn sat in the quiet of her office, feeling the weight of the past 15 years finally lift. She was Evelyn Laurent now. Not Sterling, not Ashford, but something new. Something she'd chosen for herself. Her phone buzzed with a text from Olivia. "Rebecca told me the divorce is final. How are you holding up?" "I'm good," Evelyn typed back. Really good, actually. Ready for the next chapter. Drinks tonight to celebrate? I'm buying. Can't tonight. Have a Riverside project meeting until 7. But tomorrow? And Liv? Thank you. For always believing I was worth more than I was settling for. That's what little sisters are for, Olivia responded. Well, that, and reminding you that you're a badass who doesn't need anyone to complete her. Evelyn smiled, feeling the truth of that settle into her bones. She didn't need completing. She was already whole. The revelation felt like coming home to herself after a very long journey. Friday evening found Evelyn at a corner table in an intimate Soho restaurant across from Adrienne Laurent, discussing gallery partnerships and modern art markets with an ease that felt both intellectually stimulating and emotionally comfortable. "You're different than you were 2 weeks ago," Adrienne observed over dessert. "More settled. More at peace." "The divorce was finalized this week," Evelyn said simply. "It's amazing how liberating legal closure can be." "I imagine it is. And now, what comes next for the newly independent Evelyn Laurent?" She told him about Thomas Blackwood's offer, about the Riverside project's success, about the Met Board and the foundation work, and all the opportunities that were suddenly opening up now that she wasn't trying to fit herself into someone else's vision of who she should be. "You're building an empire," Adrienne said with obvious admiration. "Your own empire on your own terms. It's magnificent to watch." "Is that what this is?" Evelyn asked, slightly teasing. "Watching?" "Among other things," Adrienne admitted with a smile. "I'm also hoping that once you're settled into this new life you're building, you might consider whether there's room in it for someone who finds you fascinating and would very much like to get to know you better." It had been so long since Evelyn had been courted, genuinely courted, not pursued as a trophy or acquired as an asset. Adrienne's interest felt refreshingly straightforward, devoid of the manipulation and ego games that had characterized her relationship with Victor. "I think I might consider that," she said softly. "Though I should warn you, I'm still figuring out who I am outside of being someone's wife. I might not be very good at dating or relationships or whatever this is." "Then we'll figure it out together," Adrienne said simply. "No pressure, no expectations. Just two people who enjoy each other's company, exploring where that might lead. Does that sound manageable?" "It sounds perfect," Evelyn admitted. They parted that night with plans to attend an art opening together the following week, and Evelyn walked home through the quiet streets of her West Village neighborhood, feeling something she hadn't felt in years. Genuine excitement about the future. Not hope that things might get better someday. Not determination to survive until things changed, but actual, uncomplicated excitement about the life she was actively creating for herself. She'd walked away from a kingdom, yes, but in doing so, she'd discovered that she didn't need a kingdom built by someone else. She was perfectly capable of building her own. And unlike Victor's empire, built on acquisitions and aggressive expansion and taking credit for others' contributions, Evelyn's kingdom would be built on genuine partnerships, mutual respect, and work that actually mattered. It would be smaller, perhaps, less flashy, but it would be entirely hers, and that made it infinitely more valuable than anything she'd left behind. 3 years had a way of clarifying things that months or even years of proximity never could. Evelyn stood in her Paris apartment overlooking the Seine, morning light streaming through tall windows that framed a view she'd once only dreamed about, and realized that the woman who'd walked into the Silvercrest Gala that November night felt like someone from another lifetime. The Riverside project had been completed 18 months ago, opening to universal acclaim and genuine community celebration. The Arts Center was thriving, hosting programming that actually served the neighborhood rather than just looking good in promotional materials. The partnership model Evelyn had developed became a case study in urban cultural development, cited in academic journals and urban planning conferences. More importantly, it had established Evelyn Laurent as one of the most sought-after consultants in cultural development, completely independent of any association with Victor Sterling. Thomas Blackwood's Lower Manhattan project had followed, then opportunities in Boston, Chicago, and eventually Paris, where she'd been offered a position developing a major arts initiative in the Marais district. She'd accepted relocating to Paris 6 months ago with a mixture of excitement and trepidation. It was one thing to rebuild her life in New York, where she had existing relationships and familiar territory. It was another thing entirely to start fresh in a new city, in a new country, building from scratch. But Paris had welcomed her. The work was challenging and rewarding, and Adrian, who'd initially been just a promising professional connection and then a tentative romantic possibility, had become something much more solid and real. Tu es réveillé, Adrian said, emerging from the bedroom with 2 cups of coffee and that easy smile that still made her heart skip slightly even after 2 years together. I thought you'd sleep later after yesterday's meeting ran so long. Too excited to sleep, Evelyn admitted, accepting the coffee and kissing him in greeting. The foundation board approved the expansion proposal. We're moving forward with 3 new cities next year. The Creative Futures Initiative had grown beyond anything Evelyn had imagined that night at the Silvercrest Gala. What had started as a single program in New York now operated in 6 cities, with plans for international expansion. Evelyn served as the international director, splitting her time between Paris and New York, building a career that was entirely her own creation. That's wonderful, Adrian said warmly, though I'm selfishly hoping at least one of those cities is close to Paris. I'm getting spoiled having you here more often. Actually, one of them is London, close enough for weekend visits when I need to be there in person. They settled onto the apartment's small balcony, drinking coffee and watching the city wake up below them. This had become their morning ritual when they were both in Paris, quiet time together before the day's demands pulled them in different directions. I got an email from Catherine Harrison yesterday, Evelyn said after a comfortable silence. She's planning a tribute dinner for the Foundation's 15th anniversary, asked if I'd be willing to speak about the program's evolution and impact. Will you go? I think so. It would be good to see everyone, celebrate what we've built. Olivia's been asking when I'm coming back to New York anyway. I could make a week of it. And Victor? Adrian asked carefully. He knew the history, had listened to Evelyn process the complicated emotions of that period in her life, but he never pushed or pried. Will he be there? Probably. He's still on the Foundation's major donor list, though he's much less involved than he used to be. Evelyn paused, considering how much had changed in 3 years. You know, I ran into him about 6 months ago when I was in New York for the Riverside dedication ceremony. It was the first time we'd seen each other in almost 2 years. How was that? Strange, and also fine. We had coffee, caught up on each other's lives like distant acquaintances. He's dating someone new, a woman his own age who runs a venture capital firm. He seemed different, more thoughtful, less performative. He asked about my work, seemed genuinely interested in hearing about it, and he apologized again, though I told him it wasn't necessary anymore. Was he still in love with you? Adrian asked, his tone more curious than jealous. Evelyn considered the question honestly. I don't think so. I think he's mourned what he lost and moved on, the same way I have. We were compatible in some ways, Victor and I, but we wanted fundamentally different things from life. He wanted empire building and visible success. I wanted meaningful work and genuine partnerships. Neither of those things is wrong, but they weren't compatible in a marriage. And you're happy now? With this life we're building? She turned to look at him fully, this man who'd entered her life at exactly the right moment, who valued her expertise without needing to possess it, who supported her ambitions without trying to reshape them. They'd been living together for 4 months, and it felt nothing like her marriage to Victor. There was no strategic maneuvering, no ego management, no feeling that she needed to make herself smaller to make room for him. I'm happy, she said simply. Happier than I've been in decades. Maybe ever. Adrian's smile was tender. Good, because I have something I want to discuss with you, and I'd prefer you be in a receptive mood. Evelyn felt her pulse quicken slightly. That sounds ominous. Not ominous, just significant. He set down his coffee cup and took her hand. Evelyn, these past 2 years with you have been the best of my life. I love your mind, your passion for your work, your commitment to building things that matter. I love how you've created this extraordinary life for yourself through sheer determination and brilliance. And I love being part of that life, supporting it, celebrating it with you. Adrian, let me finish, he said gently. I'm not asking you to marry me, not yet anyway. I know you need time to process what marriage means to you after everything with Victor. But I'm asking if you'd consider making this permanent, building a life together. Maybe eventually making it legal, or maybe just continuing as we are, but with the understanding that this is our partnership, our future, our choice. Evelyn felt tears well up, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming rightness of the moment. This was nothing like Victor's proposal 15 years ago, where she'd felt simultaneously excited and vaguely anxious, like she was committing to something that required her to change who she was. This felt like coming home. I would love that, she said softly. All of it. The partnership, the future, eventually the legal commitment when I'm ready. Because this, us, it feels completely different from anything I've known before. How so? Because you see me, Adrian, the real me, not some idealized version or supporting role. You celebrate my success instead of feeling threatened by it. You're building your life alongside mine instead of expecting me to fit into yours. And that makes all the difference. He pulled her close, and they sat together watching Paris wake up, making quiet plans for a future that belonged entirely to them. The Foundation's anniversary dinner was scheduled for mid-November, almost exactly 3 years after the Silvercrest Gala that had marked the beginning of Evelyn's transformation. She flew into New York on a Tuesday, immediately swept up in meetings about the international expansion and strategy sessions with the Foundation board. Olivia met her for dinner that first night at a small Italian restaurant in Brooklyn, practically bouncing with excitement. You look amazing, Olivia said immediately, hugging her sister tight. Paris clearly agrees with you. Or Adrian does. Probably both. Both definitely, Evelyn agreed, settling into their booth. How are things with you? Still working impossible hours at the public defender's office? Always. But we got a major grant approved, so we're hiring 3 new attorneys. It means I might actually take a vacation at some point. Maybe I'll visit you in Paris? Please do. Adrian keeps asking when he gets to meet the sister who kept telling me I was worth more than I was settling for. They ordered wine and pasta, falling into the easy conversation of sisters who genuinely liked each other as adults. Olivia shared stories from recent cases, and Evelyn talked about the challenges of building cultural programming across different European cities with different traditions and expectations. So the big question, Olivia said eventually, swirling wine in her glass. Are you nervous about seeing Victor at the dinner? It's been, 6 months since you last saw him? Not nervous exactly, more just curious how it will feel. The last time we talked, it was fine, cordial, But that was a brief coffee, not an entire evening at an event where we'll both be expected to be social. And his new girlfriend will be there. Probably. Catherine mentioned that Victor's been bringing Diana Morrison to events. Apparently she's smart, successful, and doesn't take any of his nonsense. Catherine approves. Olivia laughed. I bet she does. Your ex-mother-in-law always had excellent taste in women, just terrible taste in sons. Victor's not terrible, Evelyn said thoughtfully. He was just terrible for me, and I was probably terrible for him too, in different ways. We brought out each other's worst tendencies instead of our best ones. That's very mature and evolved of you. I preferred when you were angry and plotting elegant revenge. The elegant revenge was building this life, Evelyn said with a slight smile. Everything else was just noise. The anniversary dinner was held at the Plaza, the same hotel where Evelyn had stayed the night after the gala 3 years ago, planning her next moves and trying to figure out who she was without Victor Sterling defining her. The symmetry wasn't lost on her as she dressed in her hotel suite, choosing a deep emerald gown that Adrian had helped her select in Paris. You look stunning, the text from Adrian read when she sent him a photo. Knock them dead. Call me after so I can hear how brilliant you were. Evelyn arrived deliberately late. Not rudely so, but late enough that the cocktail reception was already in full swing and she wouldn't be making any kind of entrance. She wanted to blend in, celebrate the foundation's success, give her speech, and leave without drama. But the moment she walked into the ballroom, she felt the familiar shift in energy that had become almost routine over the past 3 years. People turned, smiled, approached with genuine warmth. These weren't Victor's connections anymore. They were hers. Relationships she'd built and maintained independent of any association with her ex-husband. Evelyn, you look wonderful. Catherine Harrison appeared with a champagne flute and a knowing smile. How is Paris treating you? Beautifully. The Marais project is exceeding all expectations, and the city has been incredibly welcoming. And Adrien Laurent, I heard rumors that things are quite serious. Evelyn felt herself smile in a way she couldn't control. They are. Very serious. He's wonderful, Catherine. Patient and supportive and completely secure in himself. It's refreshing. I can imagine it would be after Victor. Catherine's expression softened. I'm happy for you, dear. You've built something extraordinary, not just professionally, but personally. You've become exactly who you were always meant to be. They were joined by Margaret Blackwood, Judge Harrison, and several other Foundation board members, all eager to discuss the international expansion and hear about Evelyn's work in Paris. The conversation was stimulating, professionally focused, and exactly the kind of engagement Evelyn thrived on. She was mid-discussion about partnership models with the Louvre when she felt someone's presence beside her. Evelyn, you look beautiful. She turned to find Victor, and for just a moment felt the ghost of old emotions, not love exactly, but recognition of shared history, acknowledgement of what they'd been to each other once. He looked good. Older, yes, but in a way that suggested maturity rather than just aging. His eyes were clearer, less calculating. His smile reached his face in a way it rarely had during their marriage. Victor, it's good to see you. And she meant it, which was perhaps the strangest thing of all. You too. I hear Paris is treating you well. Very well. The work is challenging and rewarding. And you? Catherine tells me you're seeing someone. I am. Diana Morrison. She's here, actually. He gestured across the room to where a striking woman in her late 40s was deep in conversation with Senator Whitmore. She's been good for me. Calls me on my nonsense. Won't tolerate the kind of manipulation I used to think was just part of business. She's made me want to be better. I'm glad, Evelyn said honestly. Everyone deserves that kind of partnership. There was a brief silence, comfortable rather than awkward, before Victor spoke again. I wanted to thank you, actually, for the Riverside project, for seeing it through even though you had every reason to let it fail. It changed how I approach development work, made me realize that community partnerships aren't just good PR, they're essential to building things that actually matter. You're welcome. Though honestly, Victor, I didn't do it for you. I did it for the community and for my own professional development. I know, which is probably why it worked. He paused, seeming to weigh his next words carefully. I've been working with a therapist for the past 2 years, trying to understand why I made the choices I made, why I couldn't see what I had with you until I'd already destroyed it. And I've come to realize something important. What's that? That I was never ready for a partner like you, someone brilliant and capable who didn't need me to complete her. I needed to be the star of my own story, and anyone in my orbit had to be supporting cast. That's why I kept having affairs, not because you weren't enough, but because I was fundamentally incapable of being in an equal partnership. Evelyn felt something release in her chest, a tension she hadn't even realized she'd still been carrying. Thank you for saying that. It helps, knowing it wasn't about my inadequacy, but your limitation. You were never inadequate, Victor said firmly. You were extraordinary. I just couldn't handle extraordinary. I needed manageable, controllable, less threatening. Which is probably why things with Scarlett fell apart so quickly once she started developing her own opinions. And Diana? Is she extraordinary? Victor's smile was genuine. Terrifyingly so. But I'm in a different place now. Ready for a partner instead of an accessory. It's taken me 3 years, a lot of therapy, and losing the best thing I ever had to get here. But I think I finally understand what partnership actually means. I'm happy for you, Evelyn said, and meant it. Genuinely. We both deserve to find the right partnership, even if it wasn't with each other. Diana Morrison approached then, and Victor made introductions with obvious pride. Diana was impressive, sharp, funny, and clearly someone who held her own in any conversation. She treated Evelyn with friendly respect, but no awkwardness, acknowledging their shared history without making it weird. Victor talks about you often, Diana said with a directness Evelyn appreciated, usually while beating himself up for being an idiot. I tell him that self-flagellation isn't productive, but he seems to find it therapeutic. Evelyn laughed. Some lessons require repeated processing. I spent a year trying to figure out why I stayed in that marriage as long as I did. And what did you conclude? That I was building something, my career, my network, my sense of self. And I needed the stability of the marriage while I did that. It wasn't ideal, but it served a purpose. And when it stopped serving that purpose, I left. Not immediately, not impulsively, but strategically and completely. That's a remarkably healthy perspective, Diana observed. Most people I know who go through divorce spend years assigning blame. Blame is exhausting, Evelyn said simply. I'd rather spend my energy building my future than rehashing my past. The conversation flowed easily after that, all 4 of them plus Diana's colleague who'd joined the group discussing urban development trends and cultural programming challenges. It was professional, stimulating, and remarkably free of the tension Evelyn had worried might linger between her and Victor. When the dinner program began, Evelyn found herself seated at the head table with the Foundation's board members and major donors. Victor was 3 tables away with Diana, far enough that there was no expectation of continued interaction, but close enough that she could see them occasionally, heads bent together in conversation, clearly comfortable with each other in a way that suggested genuine partnership. Catherine Harrison gave opening remarks, then introduced Evelyn as the evening's keynote speaker. 15 years ago, the Silvercrest Foundation was a small grant-making organization with big dreams, Evelyn began, her voice clear and confident. We wanted to create access to arts education for talented young people regardless of their economic circumstances. What we've built in the years since has exceeded our wildest ambitions. She walked through the program's evolution, sharing success stories of students who'd gone on to prestigious universities, professional careers in the arts, teaching positions that allowed them to give back to their own communities. She discussed the expansion to 6 cities, the international partnerships being developed, the innovative programming models that were being studied and replicated worldwide. But the real measure of our success isn't in the numbers or the accolades, Evelyn continued. It's in the young artists who found their voice because someone believed in their potential. It's in the communities enriched by accessible cultural programming. It's in the partnerships we've built between institutions and neighborhoods, creating bridges where walls once stood. She paused, looking out at the assembled guests, people she'd worked with, learned from, built relationships with over 15 years of dedicated work. This foundation has been one of the great honors of my professional life, not just because of what we've accomplished, but because of what it taught me about the power of genuine partnership, about building things that outlast individual ego, about creating value that can't be measured in profit margins or personal gain. The work continues, and I'm excited to see where the next 15 years take us. The applause was sustained and genuine. People stood, and Evelyn felt tears prick at her eyes. Not from sadness, but from the overwhelming recognition of how far she'd come. The woman who'd walked into the Silvercrest Gala 3 years ago had been in transition, still figuring out who she was outside of her marriage. The woman standing at this podium was fully herself, comfortable in her achievements, secure in her worth. After the program concluded, Evelyn mingled for another hour, accepting congratulations and discussing potential partnerships. She was deep in conversation with a Chicago-based arts administrator when she felt a light touch on her elbow. Catherine Sterling, looking elegant in navy silk and pearls. "Walk with me for a moment?" Catherine suggested, and Evelyn excused herself to follow her former mother-in-law to a quieter corner of the ballroom. "That was a beautiful speech," Catherine said once they were alone. "You've built something truly remarkable with this foundation." "Thank you, though I had excellent guidance along the way. You were one of my first board members, if I remember correctly." "I was, and I've watched you grow into one of the most impressive professionals I've ever had the privilege of working with." Catherine paused, choosing her words carefully. "I wanted to apologize for my son's behavior during your marriage and for not intervening sooner when I saw how he was treating you. Catherine, that wasn't your responsibility." "Perhaps not, but I watched him take you for granted year after year, and I told myself it wasn't my place to interfere in his marriage. I should have said something, should have reminded him what he had before he lost it." Evelyn took her former mother-in-law's hand gently. "Victor and I needed to end, not because either of us was terrible, but because we wanted different things and brought out each other's worst tendencies instead of our best ones. You couldn't have fixed that with a conversation. Still, I'm sorry you had to endure years of being undervalued before you found the courage to leave." "I'm not," Evelyn said honestly. "Those years taught me important lessons about my own worth, about what I want from partnership, about the difference between comfort and happiness. I needed to learn those lessons, even if the learning was sometimes painful. And now, I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." Catherine's smile was warm. "In Paris, building an international career and partnering with a man who actually appreciates you?" "Exactly." "Good. You deserve that, Evelyn." "You always did." Catherine hesitated, then continued. "Victor seems different lately, more thoughtful. Diana has been good for him, I think, but he knows what he lost when he lost you. That regret will probably stay with him forever." "I hope not," Evelyn said gently. "I hope he moves past regret into acceptance. We weren't right for each other, and that's okay. We both found better partnerships afterward. That's the happy ending, Catherine. Not me punishing him forever, but both of us building lives that actually fit who we are." They embraced, years of complicated history and genuine affection contained in that simple gesture. Evelyn left the plaza around 11, declining several invitations to continue the celebration at various after-parties. She wanted quiet, wanted to process the evening's emotions, wanted to call Adrian and share everything that had happened. She walked through Central Park despite the November chill, needing the movement and the city sounds to ground her. So much had changed in 3 years. She'd transformed from Victor Sterling's underestimated wife to Evelyn Laurent, recognized expert in cultural development. She'd built a career that mattered, found a partnership that fulfilled her, created a life that was entirely her own design. And Victor? He'd apparently found his own path too, with someone better suited to who he was trying to become. There was something profoundly healing about that realization, that endings didn't have to be bitter, that people could hurt each other deeply and still wish each other well from a distance, that divorce could be the beginning of 2 better stories instead of the tragic end of one. Her phone rang. Adrian, right on schedule. "How was it?" he asked immediately. "Perfect," Evelyn said honestly. "Strange and emotional and ultimately perfect. I saw Victor, met his girlfriend, gave my speech, remembered why I love this work so much. And mostly, I felt grateful." "Grateful for what?" "For having the courage to leave when I did. For building this life I'm living now. For finding you. For finally understanding that I don't need anyone to complete me. I just need people who appreciate the whole person I already am." "I do appreciate you," Adrian said softly. "Every brilliant, passionate, occasionally stubborn part of you. When are you coming home?" Home. He meant Paris, meant the apartment they shared, meant the life they were building together. And for the first time in decades, Evelyn didn't have to translate or adjust or figure out what someone else meant by that word. Home was wherever she chose to build it. And right now, that was Paris, with a man who loved her for exactly who she was. "Day after tomorrow," she said. "I have a few more meetings tomorrow, dinner with Olivia, then I'm on the evening flight. Will you pick me up from the airport?" "Always. I love you, Evelyn." "I love you too." After hanging up, Evelyn stood at the edge of Bethesda Fountain, looking up at the Angel of the Water statue illuminated against the night sky. She'd walked past this fountain hundreds of times during her marriage to Victor, usually on her way to some event or meeting or obligation. But she'd never really stopped to look at it, never taken the time to appreciate its beauty, independent of wherever she was rushing to next. She looked now, really looked, at the angel with her outstretched wings and calm expression, blessing the waters below with healing and renewal. 3 years ago, Evelyn had walked into a ballroom full of people who'd expected her to hide in shame. Instead, she'd shown them who she really was, someone strong enough to reclaim her own narrative, confident enough to build her own success, brave enough to choose herself even when it was difficult. That night had been the beginning. But this moment, standing alone in Central Park 3 years later, finally feeling completely at peace with her choices, this was the real victory. She didn't need Victor to fail for her to succeed. She didn't need revenge or vindication or public acknowledgement of who'd been right or wrong. She just needed to keep building the life she actually wanted, surrounded by people who valued her, doing work that mattered. The rest was just noise. Evelyn pulled her coat tighter against the November wind and headed toward Fifth Avenue, where a taxi would take her back to her hotel. Tomorrow she'd have breakfast with Foundation board members, lunch with potential partners for the London expansion, dinner with Olivia to celebrate 3 years of freedom and growth. And the day after that, she'd fly home to Paris, to Adrian, to the life she'd built from scratch when she'd finally had the courage to choose herself. The story that had begun with a dramatic entrance at a charity gala didn't end with any single moment of triumph or revenge. It ended with something quieter but infinitely more powerful, a woman who'd finally figured out her own worth and built a life that honored it. Evelyn Laurent, formerly Sterling, formerly Ashford, always entirely herself, had won. Not because she'd destroyed her ex-husband or proven she was better than him, but because she'd outgrown the need to measure her success against anyone else's expectations. And in the end, that was the truest victory of all.